He got reincarnated by pure accident, like the universe hit the wrong button. Jake got cremated way too early and then, over the top, completely out of his mind, he said to another world, sent there as a reward for what they lost, with nothing but a smartphone and the power to heal. With this brand new beginning, the leader of a beaten barbarian tribe, already crushed under the heel of a massive empire. So instead of fighting for survival, he does the exact opposite. He refuses to stay down and rebuilds everything again. Regroups, then surges forward and starts shoving their way in, recoiling from a battlefield that was already lost. Ignited a battle that became a full-on war for independence. It all kicks off with Munyo-san of the Wafankro Empire's emperor, Gordius III, while Gaia and his uncle Athos Lunko get dragged into the chaos right from the start. His uncle came to pay his respects, and he waved it off with a sneer, just some backwater tribe daring to rebel against the empire. Did they honestly think they could beat them? Luckily for everyone, the emperor shows no mercy only to his enemies. If their tribe kneels to the empire, they'll live so rejoice, serve faithfully, and remember who's in control. They're nothing but pathetic barbarians, and as the protagonist lay sprawled on the floor, a kick still ringing in his bones, he stared up at his uncle. He snapped back to the moment he arrived in this world, when a god and his angel assistant stood before him and spoke, like it was the start of everything. An incorporeal presence admitted the mistake, apologized with total sincerity, and the second they finished, he just stared back in sheer stunned confusion. God clocked his confusion, didn't he? Of course this place is basically the afterlife, just in human terms. He jabbed at his assistant and told her, that girl was right at the accident I survived. She just fought her way through and dragged me here alive. MC was totally baffled. God kept apologizing for his age, yet somehow he was still a virgin, and the man looked genuinely heartbroken about it. He objected, but that's not who he is, right? Everyone slips up, so bring him back, and it'll all be fine. God stalled for a breath and finally blurted, listen, his body's already been cremated. The protagonist froze, totally baffled. Wait, what's happening? So he can't come back? Then what am I supposed to? What's he supposed to do now? Angel snapped, telling him to calm down like he wasn't an adult throwing a tantrum until the protagonist shot back with a sharp ear. Rage simmered in him as he replayed what he just heard. This was all her fault, wasn't it? And she still had the nerve to talk back to him? Unbelievable. God lifted his hand with a calm, peace-seeking gesture and told him, let him speak, give him a chance, because when something like this goes down, there's a way to fix it. He can't send him back to his world, but he can shove his soul into another one, and he won't let it end there. He won't get reborn. Instead, he'll wake up in the body of someone who died young. And the protagonist's skepticism as loud as God keeps going, refusing to stop. He kept insisting that since it was their fault, he'd give him power-real abilities to help him survive, and that was his way of apologizing. MC was hit with confused apologies, like the universe already marked him for rebirth, but then his life still hadn't been anything like smooth sailing. Honestly, it was almost too good. Then they even handed him a funeral, and that twist hit like a brick. If there's a real shot to start over, things might not be so terrible after all. So, after a moment's thought, he went, all right, I'm in. And God practically beamed. Okay, he spelled out exactly what abilities he meant. And the man stared like, wait, what abilities are you handing me? The angel burst out in happy excitement. Then I can help. Because honestly, she'd been dreaming of doing this at least once, and Gaia fumed, irritated. She looked like she was having the time of her life. Then she'd still forge his body stronger because that's everything. And yes, languages are non-negotiable. Then she tossed out another idea. Or maybe we could hand him something from his world, like a smartphone. God blinked in shock. A smartphone? God blinked in shock. The protagonist blurted, what is it? And God snapped, it's the service bells ending tell him to go. Work-life balance was the rule these days, so the protagonist blurted in panic, schedule departure? Fallon, but what about his rebirth? God promised he'd get an ability picked at random only. It had to be something truly good. And his assistant, Winkton, was right there. And they shrugged. That's nothing. Snap your fingers and it's done. The MC immediately shot back. Wait, what are you even talking about? You can't just mash it randomly. It's It's a disaster once the god and the angel dissolve. They just blur out, all right then, safe travels, and Gaia snaps with rage at those careless fools. The god and the angel, their careless mistake, and their just as careless call. He'd started his second life, then he jolted awake and leapt out of bed, terrified, because his whole body and head were shredded with wounds, wrapped tight in bandages from top to toe. The man beside him blurted out in shock, "Gaia?" And the protagonist froze, spinning in confusion. Wait, is that really his new name? His uncle Athos's uncle stared in shock, like he couldn't even trust what he was seeing, and it hit him all at once. Finally, the protagonist clamped both hands to his head, trembling in pure terror as a wave of unknown truths about this world flooded straight into him. Right into his skull too much. His head was about to blow wide open, and this god couldn't even warn him first. Athos grabbed the hand and screamed in panic. What the hell was wrong with him? MC shot him a look and thought, wait, is that really his uncle, Athos? He shouted the man's name, and the moment the guy locked eyes with him, amazement hit, then tears spilled. His eyes clung to him like a lifeline, and Athos burst out, "Thank God!" He was over the moon his nephew was alive. After losing his older brother and his wife, he clung to that one miracle. Gaia snapped in shock, terrified she'd lose him too. Then the god dropped the bombshell. He'd be handed the body of someone who died young. So yeah, turns out the nephew really did die. And all that love and care was meant for the real one. Real Gaia. But was it truly right for him to use it like that? Athos wiped the tears off his face. When they asked how his wounds were after everything he'd been hit again and again for daring to speak out against the Imperials, he stared at his own body in pure confusion and winced hard-like. What is happening to me? Stopping right there as the scene cut off. Athos jolted in shock, then blinked, stunned as his wounds knitted themselves back together right before his very eyes. They told him they'd make his body stronger, but was that all there was? And how was he even supposed to explain that to him? And in the future, he yanked the bandages off, stared him in the eyes, and said, "Athos, everything's fine. It's not as terrible as it looks." The man grinned and told me, "I get it okay." Then his smile vanished. His voice turned sharp, and he said, He's apologizing, but as soon as the ink was barely dry on his wake-up, they were already dragging him into action right now. Can you even get up yet? The protagonist. He shot back, in surprise. Yeah, he already could. And the second he said it, he bolted out of bed, threw on his clothes, and rushed out the door. From everything that had just slammed into his mind, Gaia was the chieftain's son of the Bruman tribe, and that tribe had finally snapped under the Wafankro Empire's tyranny. The imperial envoy caught Athos and demanded, "How's Gaia? How's his wounds?" Athos answered, "He's fine, he can tell the emperor tell him they'll be here any moment." Now let Athos and Gaia talk, and let that moment cut through the air. The Bruman tribe is about to step before the emperor to beg forgiveness for what went downright as the antagonist snapped, stunned. What? Apologize to the empire? Are you serious? And the uncle answered with a heavy, sad silence. Trapped with no escape, their tribe rose up against the empire's brutal tyranny, and they got crushed. So now, when they reached the emperor and dropped to their knees, Gordius III asked, his face heavy with gloom, whether they had anything at all to say for themselves. Athos shot back, "Yes, your majesty." He made it clear this rebellion wasn't some wild accident. It was all the former chieftain Noel, acting alone. Their clan got dragged into a fight they never asked for, and the MC couldn't stop wondering if Noel was his father's name in this world. The uncle didn't stop. He kept begging the emperor to spare their clan and show them mercy. Muno, the emperor's son, barked at Gaius to lift his head. When he finally complied, Munoi blasted him in the face with everything she had, launching him. He crash-landed onto the floor. Then the boy sneered with pure contempt and snapped, "He's talking. He's begging for mercy, like he thinks the world owes it to him. He says he's worth less than cattle, yet he asks like a king. And that audacity from a barbarian? It's pure arrogance." Athos snapped, panicked, and raced toward Muno, yelling to his nephew as he moved, began begging him to stop, sobbing for forgiveness. But the emperor's son recoiled in disgust, shoved him aside, and snapped that he'd never touch him with those filthy hands again. Rage surged inside the protagonist, and it only kept building like a barbarian finally breaking free. The emperor snapped at his son to stop cold, and Munoi wanted to blurt out a protest to his father. But under his heavy gaze, he wilted, and then Gordius III cut in, calling Gaius the acting chieftain of the tribe and Athos. This rebellion shattered the empire's fragile peace and crushed the people he swore to protect. There was no forgiving it, but he refused to unleash needless bloodshed. He'd heard Clan Bruman was packed with ruthless warriors, so now they'd swear every last drop of blood to the empire, starting today. Their atonement is sealed. Ethel drops into a deep bow to the emperor, thanking his majesty for sparing his life. Then the chief imperial knight steps forward and addresses the emperor, ready to speak. Later, he ordered them to serve well and to remember their place. Then Athos tore back to his tribe, hauling the unconscious Gaius on his shoulders. Those words from the emperor's son about barbarians kept echoing in his head, and right then the protagonist snapped his gaze to the man and demanded, "Hey, are you awake yet?" He blurted, "I'm sorry, I turned my own parents into villains, and damn, it's heartbreaking because they can't even lift a finger to defend the honor of their own tribe." So the protagonist thought about his father and mother. Were barbarians then? In that instant, a horrifying vision of their deaths slammed into his mind. Right then, it hit him, and suddenly a scene flashed in his head. Him, still blazing young, a tiny kid trudged through the forest hand in hand with his father, clutching a bright flower like it meant everything. He turned to his father and demanded to know why the Imperials called them barbarians, when they were the ones they claimed were from. Noel let out a heavy sigh and said, "They're from the Bruman tribe, and that's why they can't understand a word of their language. To the Empire, every word they speak comes out as gibberish elves, lizard men, their own clan too just, barbarians from start to finish." The MC blinked in shock. Wait, they don't understand them? Are they? Are they really that stupid? His father stared at him in shock before the words even landed. Then they burst into laughter, ruffled his head, and snapped, "No way, yeah, they're just idiots. They've got there. They'd choose their own path. And it's just as solid as the Imperial way, so one day they'll finally break free and tear open their chains." They broke away from the Empire's rule and carved out a land for themselves. Then the image vanished as Gaius blinked, and just like that, it was gone. Fresh tears spilled from his eyes. Athos snapped into alarm and cried out, "Is he hurt?" while the protagonist shot back in full fury. He shot back? No. Rage was boiling in him. How dare they make them suffer like this? Why did his parents and their whole people have to die? Was it really just because the Imperials call them barbarians doesn't make it true? This is all wrong, and it's starting to hit him. His uncle and the tribal men escorting them stared at him with pure astonishment. Athos blurted out his name, visibly stunned, and the protagonist realized, oh, no, he'd never felt anything this intense before. Nothing before. So what's this then? Are these guys supposed to have feelings? He stared at his shaking hands and realized, nope, those aren't anyone else's feelings, he snapped, saying it straight out loud, and swore he'd never forgive. He handed over the Empire, then snapped, refusing to do it. Tears surged in his eyes, and he angrily wiped them away like they were a betrayal. Being powerless is humiliating, and it stings way more than it should. They have to get stronger, no excuses, because later, at the tribe, everything's going to depend on it. At the tribal meeting, the villagers demanded to know if Athos was for real, because he didn't just talk. He insisted his nephew would be the next chieftain, the mayor. The man snapped back, "Yes." One of the others blurted, "Wait, didn't I just give him an excuse to be rude? Or is he too young to be doing this?" Young? Wouldn't it make more sense for Athos to lead the tribe? The man snapped back, no, he even believed Gaius should. He's the one who should take the lead. Yeah, he's got his flaws, but he'll still stand by him, so come on, let everyone help him out. Assume this role right now. The villagers stared for a beat, then they gave in. So be it. And one of the men stepped forward, the authoritative type. The voice told him, all right, if Athos is speaking with that kind of confidence, I believe him. Trusted his judgment. Then, after a stretch of silence, the protagonist finally turned to his uncle and asked him if he was even sure this was the right move. Athos stared him down in total silence. Suddenly, he yanked his spoon out of the stew, froze, and blurted in panic, I. Bewilderment crashes in what's wrong. He can't even tell. He snapped back. That's not the point, then leaned in hard and stared closely at his nephew. You, the MC muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, because, yeah, he's saying he's never led anyone, so he won't claim he's sure. Athos just let out a laugh and snapped. Enough. His brother and his father were fearless, and when he spoke, passion blazed out of every word. Passionately about Bruman's future. He wanted to back him every step, and he knew that Gaia was still fresh and knew nothing like him at all, and somehow make him forgive him for pinning all his hopes on him. Make sure you can trust him, because the moment the protagonist steps out, he's gone. And he realized this reckless god really had it coming, like he'd put the whole thing on purpose, toss him into a living nightmare. He couldn't shake the feeling he'd wake up any second, but he never did. He'd go to any lengths to get it done. And there were people out there who truly believed in him, and he'd climb from the very bottom, then make their wishes come true. At the bottom, he had nothing left to fear, so he clenched his fists and vowed to tear the empire apart. Let them spit barbarian if they want. He'd wear it like a crown, never backing down as he retreated to In a quiet corner away from everyone, he remembered the angel's words about that smartphone and decided to try it right then. He jabbed his index finger into the air and flicked it on. Then it actually worked, and he couldn't stop staring like, wait, how is this happening? Turns out it worked, because this unique power was a gift from God. And yeah, it seemed like he didn't know much about their smartphones either. He broke it down for me like a digital map, then promised he'd crack it in no time. He tapped the screen boom. An image snapped into view, and then he muttered, stunned. Whoa, there's a super detailed map here, packed with info on plants, animals, and resources too straight up. It's straight up mind-blowing. Sure, the power's name sounds dumb, but it's about to hand them a massive edge, and he's already thinking, even the Empire can't pull up a map like this, because this one comes loaded with secrets about the people. Right then, they even spill details about his uncle, Athos, the man they call. The man blurted his name into the air, totally stunned, and demanded what the protagonist was doing. The antagonist jolted in shock, then threw himself in front of the device like a living shield. Body said nothing, just kept strolling like he had nowhere else to be. Athos told them, if I'm free, count me in, I'm coming to help you guys. Imperial soldiers shattered the fence, and it had to be fixed fast. The protagonist gasped in disbelief. Only he could see that system window. So, yeah, he's basically just lost in space, waving his hands like a total lunatic. Next time. He didn't have time to mess around, so as he neared the construction site, Athos fired up the residents and asked how the work was coming along. They said, good, then they'll be done in no time. But the real nightmare hit next. The warehouse was wrecked too, and all they could do was keep pushing with almost nothing to work with. After the Imperial attack, there was barely any food left, so the MC snapped. Why didn't we just grab it then? Nothing grows around here, right? His uncle shot back, stunned that they were broke. Yet the protagonist realized they barely had any arable land in the first place. In the forest where the tribe makes its home, they can hunt wild animals for meals. But every day, they still have to trade for grain, and even snatched essential supplies from their neighbors. Then, the second it came time to buy, he immediately started, realizing they've got barely any gold left, because the tribes once survived on bartering. But now the Empire has. They hogged most of the fertile land, and now he's got to hunt down something he can sell, because they're already plotting a rebellion against the Empire still fed off its economy, and yeah, they couldn't escape that truth. So he took off to scout the area, flipping on his. He glanced at his smartphone, stared at the map, and suddenly realized this location was actually a deposit. He dropped the deposit and right away, he learned they had rock salt here. The moment he arrived, pure awe hit him like a wave. To confirm it was real rock salt, he shot straight over right away. Nostalgia hit him like a wave, and he ached to feel the sea again. Then MC's mind went, wait, could this actually be sold? He stared hard at the islands of rock salt. Salt and pure survival are tied together. Salt is everything to their lives. And since salt deposits are unbelievably rare, they're forced to keep searching because they can't afford to go without. And sure, they could make it from seawater, but that takes forever. Back in their village, salt is pure luxury, so yeah, of course. Yeah, it all boils down to the deposit. If it's big enough, they'll start shipping it straight to the Empire. This spot is right on the edge of the village, so he checked the system and saw the alert telling him he was on. The protagonist froze in shock, because if it's right there near the village, why in the world has no one found it yet? Right then, a blood bear burst out from behind the trees and roared the moment they spotted a man bolting away from the beach. The protagonist finally pieced it together. This beast wasn't random. This is the habitat of blood bears. The smartphone says these animals aren't really all that dangerous. So, why stall it? MC sprang onto A. He shoved himself off the tree and went flying through the air. He swung his sword and drove it into the bear's skull. Then, out of nowhere, surprise hit him hard. Surprise, his weapon ricocheted off his opponent like a bouncing ball, and it didn't even stop without. He didn't even get a scratch, so he bolted again, blazing fast. When he finally rolled into the village, he wasted no time and spilled everything to his uncle. But Athos blurted, stunned. Then he barreled into a blood bear, and for once, luck had his back, because he wasn't. He took it in stride, completely unhurt, and then the protagonist finally admitted the truth. He figured it was his rock-solid body. His wounds were sealing up in literally minutes, until one girl pointed out that the bear's hide was so tough, a regular knife can't even scratch through it. Then the man sitting by her warns that if they wipe those things out, it'll wreck the neighboring forests too. The protagonist sighed in pain and basically asked, "So you're tough because you got tough hides, right? Looks like he'll have to shelve the rock salt for now." Athos shot him a question, like, "What are you doing?" So he shot back, "Why would I be here? I heard your tribe's drowning in money problems." He hunted for places they could start farming, and they hadn't even stepped into the blood bear's habitat yet. And he was sure he'd find something there, because honestly, he's not exactly skilled at much, except messing around and pushing forward. Even so, as the chief, he's determined to find a way to help his tribe. One villager gasped. Did he hit his head or something? Because he'd never talked like that before. Then another villager snorted. They're teasing him again. He waved it off like it was nothing. No need to worry. Lily chuckled and said that when money's on the table, nobody beats Athos. He's a real master negotiator. Athos snapped. No, those fools just don't know how to act, so let them trust. Trust me, MC stammered, still stunned. They'll score cash the usual way, nothing fancy. The villagers gave him that usual look, shock on their faces, then broke into warm smiles. Lily flashed a smile. Then they snapped back. We're mercenaries. Right then, Lily roared at the warriors. Get ready. They're next. Argius is their kingdom. This time, the Empire hired them, and that deal doesn't sit right. They've got one mission left. Finish the job. She blazed through the job to snatch their gold, then swung from warrior to warrior, cornering one and demanding, "Did you fix?" He fixed the armor? He snapped back. There's just too much of it. I won't finish in time. If I'm lucky, I can fix her armor too. One of the warriors shouted that he'd stretch the spear shaft even longer. Now nobody could reach it. You're a fool, someone snapped, and then the warriors roared back. So where are the weapons? What do we do? Go reach that bear? Barehanded, they launched into a quick scuffle, and the protagonist froze in shock because everyone around them looked swamped with something else. Athos gave a sharp little chuckle and said, "Wars are their bread and butter." Right. Just then, a mercenary shouted to him with a bright grin and delivered his order. No hesitation. His order finally hit right on the dot, and with it came a brand new weapon for the warriors. When they spotted those new swords, their faces lit up, then they tore them apart. He lined up the weapons and swung them around, grinning like a kid, while the protagonist froze shocked and asked his uncle why he'd ordered brand new gear. It must have cost a fortune. Athos snapped back, no, nothing like that. Turns out their new employer had simply treated them kindly and handed those things over. His employer, MC, blurted, totally baffled, "What?" And his uncle shot back, "The Empire is backing them now, and it's only getting bigger." They were promised massive food supplies in the war, so when he heard it, confusion hit him, and he blurted, "Wait, is that true?" Because the moment he learned the facts, the truth burned in his mind. He learned the Empire had hired them, so he figured they'd just shove them to the side. Then they even offered him solid pay, or at least decent pay. As pay, Athos stared him down and said, "The current emperor, Gordius III, has a soft spot for war. This empire is stuck in non-stop battles with neighboring countries. Every time they win, they bulldoze ahead and seize fresh territories, stretching their borders wide. Yet somehow, in his mind, they They had one problem: no strong soldiers, so even after losing as a tribe, they desperately needed mercenaries, and that choice gave them a huge upper hand in the negotiations. The protagonist stared at him and blurted in awe, "You're amazing," and the man instantly flushed, laughed it off, and snapped, "What's wrong with you? Stop embarrassing me." He spun to the protagonist and declared, "There's something for you, go look. Your old sword is back." "Go, good," he blurted out. Stunned then, he grabbed a weapon and the warriors erupted in cheers to hype him up, and things were about to get even crazier. "Now you can hunt blood bears," the mercenary said. "So what do you think, huh?" MC stared at the weapon, realizing he'd wanted answers for ages. Then he leaned in and saw it. The swords weren't made of iron at all. "So, what is this?" "It's copper, or maybe bronze, either way. It's an alloy made from copper and tin, and you can actually work it without making your life miserable. It's easy to polish and tough against corrosion. And yeah, 10 yen coins are made from bronze, an alloy that's surprisingly easy to work with and built to last for a long, long time." Time crawls by, and you learn the brutal truth. Bronze can't hold a candle to iron is many times stronger. This takes real master-level craftsmanship, so take a good look at the armor of the Imperial soldier. Soldiers rely on iron for most of it. Still, it all slams back into their main nightmare. They can only stand there and dream of the real thing. It's just too damn expensive, so his imagination lit up a whole mountain of coins then. What stopped him from killing the blood bearer wasn't courage, it was the weapon falling apart in his hands, and once they finally earned some, first thing they had to do was grab iron weapons, because money wouldn't save them without steel in their hands. Athos whipped around and told him he had a proposal, then the words hit him like a punch as he stared back totally baffled. What it would be, this guy nervously raked his fingers through his hair and admitted he thought it was this fight is going to be massive, and just their forces alone might not be enough. So this time, he didn't just make a plan, he pushed to recruit help from the other tribes. After a while, fresh warriors came charging toward their village. They weren't heroes at all, just everyday elves and lizards, living ordinary lives. The lizardman burst out in shock, the words flying out of him as his eyes widened. "Surprise, wow!" Uncle said Even the tribes of Anguero and Bondar showed up. Then the lizardmen marched in too, and man, it had been ages since anyone last came like this. They huddled together, and the protagonist couldn't help but say it felt great, knowing everyone was so friendly until Athos cut in. But they were all here for the payday, because the Empire hired their tribe, and now they were about to drag everyone into a mission. The mission let him ride out, hit every tribe, and greet them all. He shot back. Of course he'd go for it. Then he locked eyes with a warrior. Warriors watched then. Jessica caught his eye, and he couldn't stop himself from admiring her, thinking she was drop-dead gorgeous. The girl. People caught his stare, then murmured something in her language. The MC stared at her, totally baffled, convinced he couldn't catch a single word she said. So the elves hit him with a totally different language, and suddenly his head started spinning. Pain slammed his skull like a vice, and he clamped his head harder. He snarled, crouched low, and yelled, "It hurts." Then it hit him, the realization crashing in fast. Elven words slammed into his head like a storm, and God's promise echoed in his mind. He'd be great at languages. A system voice thundered in his skull, downloading knowledge and installing a whole new language, and the second it happened, he knew it. That old man was up to something again. Last time, he promised everything would be fine and that he wouldn't even notice. So when Jessica leaned over him and blurted, "Wait, are you okay?" he finally came apart. "Okay?" The protagonist snapped back, and right away she begged, "Please forgive me, he's fine, don't worry." Jessica frowned, totally lost. "Wait, worry? What kind of language is that, and why would I know it?" Right then, Rosso the lizard man slithered up to him fast. He asked if I knew this guy named Guy, a leader of the lizardman tribe, and then he said his name was Rosso, and he'd heard they were finally going to be led by the chief. The Bruman tribe's chieftain, he's dying to meet him. Where was he? The protagonist shot back, completely lost and staring like, "Wait, what?" It was him, and he couldn't help but thank him for stepping in to help. Then Rosso shook it. He shot out his hand and straightened things out. So, yeah, Brumund was the chieftain, and the moment he said it, the protagonist was genuinely relieved to finally meet him, thrilled that their respect was mutual. Then the confession cut off mid-sentence. I couldn't help but lean in, thrilled to finally meet him, and the lizard man shot back asking if he was too small for the tribe and whether he'd been eating well. The MC said, "Sure, he'll grow up soon," and Rosso burst out laughing, yelling, "He's just joking!" Then Jessica let out a sigh and started, Idle chatter erupted as the lizard men snapped. "Offense intended. Are you the elven tribe?" They spoke in pure barbaric nonsense, so nobody could understand a single thought behind it. Jessica stared at him with heavy eyes and announced, "She's the niece of the elven village chief Jessica." He could speak the common tongue. He just didn't. They hated saying it out loud, and the truth was, none of it had anything to do with what they were thinking. Rosso blinked in shock. "Wait. This has nothing to do with the lizard tribe, which means she can actually speak the language. So she's been understanding them this whole time then. Why is she staying silent?" Shy Jessica shot back. "Of course not. Their elven language sounds way more refined than that. Let them speak in their language," the protagonist thought, baffled like this was the very first time they'd ever met. So why were they snapping at each other like enemies already? Because the elves kept shooting irritated looks at the lizardmen, who snapped their head back at them. Right then, Athos blurted, told him it was time to go, and he froze, completely caught off guard. Already? He hadn't even finished briefing the other chieftains, and his uncle just cut in. The mercenaries warned that this ride would drag on forever, so they ordered their chieftain to suck it up and push through. Effort. Everyone snapped into motion, rushing to form up their troops while the protagonist can't contain himself. He's buzzing with excitement, convinced he's about to charge straight into the battlefield. This was his very first battle, and the warrior burst into motion, ready to clash. Out on the blazing plains of the kingdom of Argias, in the southeast corner of the kingdom, right where a mountain range looms like a threat, the story was already rolling. And this wasn't even the first time trouble started. A vicious struggle rages between the empire and the kingdom, each clawing for control of this land. Once peaceful fields of golden wheat once stretched across it, but now only this. The spear tips of the empire's soldiers flashed in view as the chief knight snapped his command stop and announced that their main objective was. Their mission was to crush the kingdom's main army on the Pyros Plain and seize control of these lands again. They were the rightful guardians of this land, and they would never let it happen. They let criminals run wild through their lands, free to do whatever they wanted. No consequences. Ever. They'd plant their main forces here, then before long, His Majesty the Emperor would step in and proudly prove the Empire's power. The whole group surged toward the kingdom, and the knights erupted into a chant, "Glory to His Majesty the Emperor," while the protagonist stared, thinking, wow, the Emperor was a legend to the soldiers. And the Empire? It never stopped clashing with neighboring countries. Every fresh victory meant new territory, new gains, and a relentless march that captured new territories, pushed their borders outward, and even with fury in his gut toward the Emperor, he couldn't deny it. People looked up to him. Now, he just had to rein it in, because he still had work to finish. The general roared that once they seized these lands, they'd march south to back Prince Mino, because he's counting on every one of them. His comrade smirked and said, "If the prince is the one calling the shots, we're good, right?" And the general shot back, "Lower your voice. If they catch it, you're done." He told the soldiers they'd been ordered to stand there and wait for the next command. When the main crew spun toward him and demanded, "Okay, where are we headed?" They needed to move right now, and the general stared at him, utterly stunned, and blurted out, "Are these barbarians or something else? What are they doing here right now?" And right here, the knights snapped back, so they were hired as mercenaries, huh? But wait, how could they even speak with the imperial language? From the looks on their faces, it was clear they had no idea what was going on. And then you had to wonder why they'd even been hired in the first place. And why were they hired? And so yeah, the general snapped out of his confusion and demanded the truth. Wait, are those really barbarian mercenaries? Their fighting style is totally different from the imperial one, and the commanders are about. They'll struggle to control their troops if they pack them into the main formation, so it's way better to have them cover the flank instead. Cover their flanks only that, and then everyone scatters their own way, and the MC said, "Ear." Rage boiled in him. What a total arrogant idiot. He swore they were just dead weight, a nuisance in the way. "Athos is right," he snapped. "They could have at least faked a little happiness to see us." Lily told them they'd need to wait it out, and one of the warriors shot back. So what tactics are you really using? With such massive shields towered in front of them, so slow the protagonist might as well have been watching a turtle crawl. And he finally forced himself to calm down. If they start causing a scene right here, we'll pay for it later, he said it loud and clear. Most tribes don't speak the imperial language, so they have to spell out what's going on to the others, because keeping peace and strong ties between tribes is the whole game. Two warriors clocked it at the same time. Yeah, with their temperaments. A brawl was basically guaranteed. The antagonist smirked, like, it's just a joke, right? And told their leader, don't worry, as they prepared to fight without fear and dying with zero regrets. Yeah, in their tribe, that's the ultimate honor. MC knitted his brow and wondered, is this the reason my parents are dead? Then he realized, so that's why they're branded mercenaries, and not just for show, because they live their lives so differently, and because each of them faces death in their own way. He started to. He slipped into a hidden corner, yanked out his smartphone, and muttered, they're not like him. If it were up to me, he'd rather rack up 0 casualties. Now that he'd finally stepped onto the battlefield, he was convinced things didn't have to spiral like this. Trying to stop everyone from piling up needless casualties was pointless, so he could only hope. He prayed the barbarians would barely fall, and then he let out a quiet chuckle, and pointed out that going all in on the money was the smartest move. That's exactly why you showed up here, because you were supposed to have an answer, and yet there wasn't a damn thing useful in the area right then. A magical expo lit up the scene. An explosion erupted across space, and the knights roared at the warriors, demanding action. How were they holding up? Was that magic at work? Who the hell had the nerve to pull that off in our camp? One of the warriors snapped. No, it's them. The barbarians did this, and they didn't hesitate to point at Jessica and snap. That little girl is. The girl took the blame for everything, then she suddenly lunged at him, and the knight hit the road, and boom, barbarians showed up like they owned the place, and they couldn't even speak the imperial language. No wonder they act like savages. Jessica, all flustered, tried to force out a sentence to the... He kept trying to nail the pronunciation of that phrase so she'd finally stop getting on her nerves. The warrior just drawled, stunned. What? And you're attacking me over something that small? Trifle. He's got no clue what the forest feels like, but in the Empire, they've chained everyone as slaves. The second warrior shot back with a cheeky grin. So what if they just want a little... What's the problem? A little fun, no big deal at all. Jessica, he blurted out, there's nothing. Then the MC sprinted right up to her and demanded, what happened? She needed a moment to cool off, so the warriors flashed their grins and shouted, good, another one's here. So this is her lover. He's tiny as anything, and she's already out here dating men. Barbarians are wild beasts. Then the protagonist snapped a savage glare at them and hissed in icy, trembling anger. Tonhe's the tribe's leader, and Jessica Thon answers to him. Shock and awe hit him hard, the imperial language, and then the The protagonist kept talking, firing out apologies while insisting his comrades hadn't meant to attack them. He wouldn't stand for anyone insulting him, sure. The Empire had hired them to help, but that was no excuse to treat them like garbage. He yanked the hilt of his weapon and shouted like barbarians always do that. Any argument can be wiped out in a duel. Then what are they supposed to say to that? At that exact moment, the general snapped. What have they? What the heck is going on? Everyone scattered in a blink and told themselves to get back to their spots. He stared down the warriors and said, don't worry, when this is over, you'll explain everything to your commander. Later, the soldiers marched off with faces full of disappointment, and Jessica watched them go. He whipped his head toward the MC in shock, then snapped around hard without warning. He grabbed her hands and demanded, was that explosion you? So elves wield real magic, huh? The girl pressed the question and asked him to use it. Wilderment, huh? Magic runs in it, and most elves can wield it, so they even formed a special magic squad to handle the heavy stuff. He shot up with a gasp. Whoa, how many of them can use this, and how many times can it be fired? Then he snapped back. What's her attack? Attack range. Jessica, stunned by the flood of questions, snapped at him to stop, swearing she couldn't answer them all right now. Maybe if he went and talked to her uncle, he could finally pry the answers out of him. He squeezed her hand and begged her for help with this. The girl stared back, stunned. With her shocked friends right behind her, she stared at him, baffled out of her mind. What's wrong with you? A little later, he finally ran into Eliam, the elven village's leader, and the elf leaned in and asked if he wanted to learn elven magic. He was from the Bruman tribe, right? The protagonist snapped back. Yeah, that's me. He demanded to know why the head even asked for this, because it had nothing to do with the war. The protagonist didn't hesitate. He swore he'd tell him the truth straight up. He wants to forge an alliance with the elves, because their raw power alone just won't be enough to hold his ground against the enemies. So he decided he needed rock-solid allies he could actually trust. Usually, each barbarian tribe throws down on their own terms. Yeah, he wouldn't force them. Ellen's still holding out hope. She's betting she can forge an alliance with them. Elnyev shot his hand up and thrust it forward, demanding silence with a sharp, unmistakable gesture. Before he even considered pitching his plan, he heard Jessica out because she told him they'd already. He got into a skirmish with the Imperial soldiers, and since he knows the elven tongue, he never flinched. He straight up stood his ground. Elves always step up and repay their debts. Those are their sacred principles. The MC burst out, so yeah, it's a deal. And the elven leader shot back that he'd hear everyone out. But first he wanted to lay down his terms. Like the rest, their army stormed onto the battlefield to cash in. Alanyef leaned in and assured him that victory was theirs for the taking, then said, "And that hits you like a spark," the protagonist said, smiling at him like the future just opened wide. He grinned with pure joy and waved at Jessica. She stared at him, utterly stunned, and then her friend burst into laughter. Sheepishly, she glanced at the girl, and irritation snapped across her face. After a while, the general rallied everyone and proclaimed that Pirith's lands would finally bask in the full, ruthless glory of their grip. Stand tall, great empire. Send them all into the fight without fear. All of it done in the name of his majesty. Majesty, Emperor rolled through the hall, and the knights snapped to attention, hanging on every word. The general rallied the empire's loyal warriors once more, shouting, "May the god of war." He paused like a prayer was hanging in the air, then barked an order, sending the vanguard crashing forward. Enemy archers snapped their shields up, then the mage squad surged forward. Archers in the first squad triggered the barrier. He stepped into the spotlight, then barked his order, "Fight! Fire!" The warriors unleashed their firepower in a non-stop volley, and right on cue, the enemy snapped back with a brutal attack. Russo roared, then blurted out, "He's." The sounds of war are here right now. He spun toward his army and barked the order, "Fight." They're gonna rip away with everything they've got, no hesitation. With every ounce of power they had, the leader of the neighboring tribe went all out, and then some. He barked orders at his soldiers, too. "Move, don't let those lizard men get away." Men outflank them. A Bruman warrior snapped irritably. "Probably run now," Lily shrieked. "Oh God!" as she grabbed Athos and gasped. "What are they going to do?" The other tribes are already miles ahead, so the man leans in and calls his nephew by name, like he can't figure out what to do next. The protagonist shot back, "Yeah, everything is. They're fine, let them slip out." The knights spot their move and unleash a desperate cry, blurted out in total confusion, demanding to know where they were headed. No one showed up, so what were they even trying to escape? One of those knights. He snapped in anger, knowing deep down those barbarians were never trustworthy. Rosso stared at him with a hard, grim glare. Then the warrior demanded answers from the protagonist. "You really think they chose the right move? Because the fight is raging on the other side right now." "Ugh, of course the elves are tailing them too. What on earth are they doing here?" The MC shot back, "Don't panic, nobody's in trouble. After this, you'll even get my clothes back." He lunged as close to the enemy as he could, then the warriors erupted in total confusion. "What?" The protagonist swore they'd take the enemy commander's head first, no hesitation. They couldn't figure it out. How on earth did the protagonist know he was right here? The antagonist smirked and told them, let them think that, because he was absolutely going to swear it. Then he finally received a divine revelation, but he couldn't bring himself to tell them. He told them he'd snagged the info with a smartphone skill, because right then, the Emperor himself showed up, riding in with, while his advisors and other minions lounged around. One of his aides was stuck playing a board game. Aides leaned in and demanded, "What matters most? What could flip the whole war?" Selm. No question. Those were the Empire's fearless warriors. And the third aide snapped back, because this wasn't just strategy. It was pure fighting spirit. Their army's morale was sky high, and it practically screamed victory, and the others knew it too, because it really was true. Gordius III marched up to the Emperor and demanded, "So what does your majesty think?" Then he slid his empty glass under the jug, and the servant hurried in with a fresh glass of wine. Then he took it carefully, leaned in and scrutinized every inch of what was trapped inside the glass, down to the last detail in doubt. and stayed mute as the Gaia tribe charged ahead. Forward warriors recoiled in total shock. "Kill the commander-in-chief?" they demanded. "Are you serious right now?" he answered. He snapped back, absolutely thinking their weapons were worthless, and their weapons were useless. And they were badly outnumbered, so the only thing they owned that gave them any edge was a razor-sharp map. They pulled up a map on their smartphone, because the only way to hit the enemy is to catch them completely off guard. The commander-in-chief of the Royal Army stands at the very heart of the entire formation, like the whole battlefield is circling around him. On the right flank, they'll crash through the forest and charge straight for their commander-in-chief, because the main command force is mounted on cavalry, while the only ones left on foot are the foot soldiers. If they charge straight in, it's disaster cell. Their plan is a surprise strike, hitting before the enemy can even recover. And then, he roared for the soldiers to rip their main forces apart, screaming that the moment battle erupted, they'd be ready. So, tell me, was he really wrong? One of the soldiers snapped, "What does this even have to do with their escape?" Then he spun to Athos and barked at him, "Say it! Say something." Then the man matched his nephew's pace and replayed their conversation in his head. Gaia swore she'd slice down the enemy commander then. Chief, without a leader, the royal army would collapse overnight, and pure chaos would swallow everything. The imperial army was about to seize a massive, game-changing advantage. If this route could cut down the casualties, then yeah, he figured it was a gamble worth taking. Try. And now, watching Jessica sketch out the level alongside the protagonist, he leaned in and told the warrior. No, he trusted him, fully. He knew his nephew had it handled. The warrior shot back, cursing under his breath, and said, so he just snapped, "Come what may." The mercenary fired back, saying the last chieftain was a truly strange one, an oddball in every way. And their young chieftain? His mind was pure fire and wild hunger. Then a squad of royal mages tore in with a devastating magical strike right as the warriors snapped into cover behind their shields, nerves sparking. Then the general roared at the top of his lungs, cutting the air. "Warriors, hold the line. This barrier will shield you, so stay put and wait for the perfect chance to strike." To strike. The enemy's army wasn't bottomless either, and his assistant snapped, "Damn that magic," like he still hadn't learned to live with it. They were finally getting used to the noise. Then the general said it was a blessing they'd forged the magical barrier, because without it, they would have been wiped out for. Long ago, this place was wiped out, and sure, lots of people can do magic, but only their unit can conjure spells strong enough to pull off something like this. A thick wall of defense stood there, and the assistant snapped that, "No, just because we hate magic doesn't mean the enemy won't burn us with it." The general warned that their power would eventually run dry, and the only move is to slow down, breathe, and pick the perfect. That was the perfect opening to strike back then. A scout came sprinting up, and the general demanded, "What's the situation?" While the knight answered, "The enemy forces broke apart, and you can bet they're scrambling to switch formations. So the general's assistant just called it. They've decided to redeploy the cavalry." The commander-in-chief cut in, "It's all a ruse. Those troops aren't going anywhere." The assistant blinked, then said, "Looks like this war is dragging on for ages." The general didn't sound shocked at all. He just couldn't believe it was over in a single day. And he spun to the scout to fire off a report. The knight snapped that some of the barbarian tribe mercenaries had ditched their posts and vanished into the forest, leaving the man stunned. Barian's assistant blurted, "We're free!" and Barians heard it too. They weren't fearless warriors at all. Turns out that was just a rumor. The general stared into the forest, then snapped his gaze to the scout and demanded where they were headed next, while the knight hesitated, about to respond. He paused, staring in pure bewilderment, then added, Which way are those barbarians headed? Answer me right now." The knight felt all tangled up, like even he didn't understand what was happening, and then it got worse. Right then, the Burman tribe pushed deeper into the forest, cutting through the trees like they had a mission. Athos leaned in and grilled his nephew, then asked if he'd heard the news about forging an alliance with the elves. His reaction was absolutely wild. He was stunned, and he couldn't hide it. He had diplomatic skills in his back pocket, but he never dreamed he could actually strike a deal with the lizardmen. He should have said it way sooner then. With those words, he finally locked eyes with the tribe's leader. He burst out, "He doesn't even know what's happening." And the protagonist shot back, "So what is he doing? What was he even doing here?" He snapped back, "How could I?" as he watched their whole group bolt into the forest, and he just clicked to a stop, frozen mid-cut. Curious, he showed up, and the protagonist's eyes widened. stunned by this bizarre reason he couldn't even understand. At that exact moment, Jessica snapped her head toward him and shoved her arm forward right, where the royal army stood close by, and the allies surged in around them. They crouched low to dodge detection, and Athos shot back. "Are they there?" MC answered. Then flipped the switch and activated his smart. He grabbed his smartphone, scanned the data, and added one chilling detail. The enemy commander was already right ahead. Lily snapped that battling cavalry wouldn't be simple, and one of the warriors nodded, saying, "Yeah, they're about to give us real problems." Gaia nodded and agreed. So that's exactly why he wanted the elves to smash through the enemy cavalry line using magic. One of the warriors eyed the elven leader with disbelief, then snapped, asking if the magic he told the protagonist really was true right to the very end. If they're hiding behind that barrier, they'll only have to show us where they are. So why not let our archers take the shots and wipe them out? He shot back. "No magic, just aim right where I tell you exactly where I said." Right at the crack in their defenses, he barked the command and turned the whole fight with a single order. "Command, to attack." Then the royal warrior spotted it, shouted in alarm, and an enemy strike hit like a storm. Everything was under attack, and their general barked, "Don't panic." They panicked because all they had left was raw infantry. Order them to line up and get crushed, because right then the elves struck. They unleashed their magic boom, smacking the target dead on, right into a gap in the defense buckled, and the royal warriors panicked, and the magic hit like a storm. Magic what went down with the barter? "Tell everyone to stay sharp and be careful." "Careful," our commander snapped in a curse, then took note of that the punch found a weak spot. Disaster at full speed. He bellowed at the warriors to calm down. He finally calmed down, insisting it was just an accident. Then the magical attack surged harder, and the commander blurted out in shock, leaving him completely bewildered. Wilderment, "What's happening?" Right then, a Bruman warrior burst out. "Come on!" Did he slip through again? And the protagonist. Turgenis leaned in and told the elves' leader that they needed to push toward the far right corner. Then Alania cut in and replied, He finally got it." Jessica gasped in shock. No way, the magic had already busted through that barrier again and again. Then the protagonist thought, "That's it." The plan had gone off without a hitch. The enemy was scrambling in confusion, and now was the perfect moment to strike. The perfect time to strike was right there, so he rallied his warriors and told them the enemy had already been routed. Their whole plan aimed straight at the commander-in-chief's head, and he still sat there barking orders. Demanded the barbarian mercenary units charge into the fray, while the tribe's warriors surged ahead, hacking through their enemies. Everyone fought with everything they had, giving it their all until the commander stepped in. The royal army commander roared at his warriors, "Strike the enemy now! Everyone hold your ground. Stay right where you are. They're only infantry." Rosso slid up to him with a grim look and told him to get off, because it was time to play. Athos roared at his comrades, "Don't stop, keep the attack going." The commander was already breathing down their neck, and MC snapped his gaze to one of them. He stared at the commander and thought, "No, it can't be him." He locked eyes with the second commander and instantly thought, "So this is the real deal. This isn't the right one either, so where the heck did the one they need actually go?" He bolted forward, glanced around, and spotted a horseman, clad in rich armor. He barked orders at the warriors, "Pull back now and regroup, or face the fallout." The group stared, and the protagonist grinned like he finally cracked the code. "I found it." But right there, his prey, and he closed in hard, rushing straight toward the command. The commander lunged from behind, ready to smash him. Then the commander-in-chief twisted around at the last second, and he snapped the strike aside. Then the protagonist blurted, "He's the..." Gaia, the leader of the Bruman mercenaries, runs the whole crew. Gaia's control slipped his head would be the prize, and right then, a warrior burst onto the scene. He burst into view, sword blazing, and yelled, "You'll never touch the commandment!" Right out of nowhere, Rosso suddenly burst in beside the MC, and the whole room froze. The MC steps in front of the warrior, cuts off the path, and shoots the protagonist to command. The protagonist steps in and covers him, because the commander-in-chief is his. Then the protagonist glares at his comrade. God felt it in his bones and gratefully surged forward toward his target, while the commander-in-chief watched on. In a flash, the chief swung his weapon and roared, "You pathetic barbarian!" And the MC couldn't believe he'd ever stand a chance. That spear cut off every chance to get near. Jumping wouldn't save him either, so there was only one move left. slammed forward, and charged straight through. He charged straight in, and the commander-in-chief's spear drove straight through him. He pushed on, and then the general let out a nasty laugh. "You're just an idiot," because he never saw it coming. He figured this barbarian would fold fast, but nope, every single effort he threw at it ended up useless. In vain, he never even got to finish his last word, and the protagonist snatched the. He yanked the hand gripping the spear and snapped him hard toward himself. He yanked him off his horse, then drove a brutal punch that lifted him off his feet. The commander-in-chief gasped as his kick slammed him down and pinned him under his foot. So that's the scheme he's cooking up, and he's willing to take him down, even if it costs his own life. No, he snapped back, yanking the spear free with a sharp yank like he's mistaken, ripping it out of his life. He lifted it high over his enemy and, with those words, declared the only one who would die today was him. Words he finished him off. Right then, Rosso sprinted over, staring at his bleeding wound with pure panic in his eyes. "Are you gonna die?" they yelled, clutching their fear. Then the MC grinned through the pain, still holding his wound, and said, "Don't worry, I'm fine." "All right, he's not dying here," the lizard man growled, staring at the fallen commander-in-chief. "So, is that the enemy?" Gaia shot back. "Yes, that's our man." Then Rozzo draped an arm over his shoulders and blared, loud enough to rattle the whole battlefield. He turned to the soldiers of the royal army and shouted that their commander had been cut down by the head of the Bremen mercenaries, and the enemy stiffened, stunned by the news. The tribe's warriors erupted in cheers because he actually pulled it off, and in the middle of all that triumph, Jessica nodded and threw her full support behind him. Surprise hit her like a truck. She couldn't wrap her head around it because he really did it. One of the enemy commanders looked totally stunned. How could some pathetic little foot soldier pull off something like this? Roared at the troops, "No defeat ever. If you falter, His Highness won't be able to face what comes next." With the crown prince in his sights, no mercy, no exceptions, just slaughter Athos sizing up the situation. "Right here," he bellowed to his comrades, "the enemy's trying to box them in and surround them." They had to pull back fast because the forest gave them cover in seconds, and right then, out of nowhere, something unbelievable hit, and a squad of horsemen thundered in, charging at full speed. He charged to lend a hand, and the cavalry slammed straight into the enemy lines and tore into the fight. Rosso, the protagonist, and everyone else just gawked, stunned by what was unfolding right in front of them. Then, the tribal warriors erupted in joy, shouting, "Cavalry! It's the Imperial Cavalry! Hooray, she's saved!" Relief exploded in their voices as they started yelling at the horsemen. Yeah, let them smash every last one of them, because right then, a general rolled up to the protagonist, stared him down like he was measuring every move, and leaned in until his sentence practically cut off mid-thought. "Rosso and the others, you nailed it." He praised both of them with a warm, approving grin. When the MC himself locked eyes with him, pure astonishment hit like thunder. Then the general straight up demanded a handsome reward, expecting nothing less. With those words carved in the air, he and his army marched off the battlefield. After a while, the soldiers stared in awe. They clutched the blades they'd been handed and cheered like they'd just struck gold. What a beauty of a sword. Winning wars pays in a huge way, and then Gaia shot back, "Are those the kingdom's soldiers' swords?" Athos stared back at him, flashed a grin, and said, "Yeah, take 'em. Those are our group's trophies, so there's zero problem." He started to think about the battle Within a single day, the plain was wiped out once they lost their commander. The kingdom's army crumbled into chaos, and when the imperial soldiers surged forward, they got slammed with a crushing defeat. Warriors follow a silence-worthy rule. Whoever kills takes the trophies, no questions asked. And this imperial general? Turned out he was fair, at least when it came to divvying up the loot, even pulling a cut from the kingdom's own soldiers. Then it cut out. It felt like they were nothing but looters, but he'd still take the gift with a full heart. May this warrior's soul rest in peace. Thibaut strode up, snatched the sword lying nearby, and told him it was what a fine sword shame it was, only iron. He nodded along with his uncle, who roared that, since they were poor, they had to live off the royal army's supplies, and he knew the kingdom's soldiers had. It was packed with solid iron gear so good that the markets barely ever saw it. If they managed to snatch the whole set, they'd rake in a fortune. Sure, it was a top-notch sword built to last for ages, but if push came to shove, they could always flip it for cash. He couldn't hide it. Everyone stared at him, stunned by how bursting with joy he was, and honestly, it made perfect sense. They were scraping by, barely holding on, and when the protagonist stared at the sword in his grip, he started thinking, if I can just, even as the words trailed off mid-sentence. A weapon so brutal it could drop even bloody bears he'd be desperate to test it the moment they came back. He snapped back to it, refusing to quit on his rock salt, and caught Rosso staring over a bunch of. He lifted the blades, and then smirked, saying he was lucky too, like he'd just stumbled onto something perfect. And he needed to check out this iron sword. He stared down the two swords with icy calm, then tossed away the one he just pointed at. And that choice shocked even him. He gripped at the question hard, then barked, "What's he doing?" pointing an iron sword. He whipped around and demanded to know, in a calm voice, "So what?" But he didn't finish his sentence. He jabbed at the silver sword and bragged that it shined like a dream, then admitted he'd used one just like it before, and it rusted fast. MC froze in shock and offered. He thrust another sword at him and insisted this one was way better, but he wouldn't budge. He swore the iron blade would stand out on the battlefield, then blurted, "Tell me it's not cool to strut around with an iron weapon." A man rushed up, called out to them, and said, "Looks like you've been handed a horse too. Where am I supposed to leave it?" They stared at it, and Rosso's mouth immediately started watering as he reached for the reins and called the horse. He snatched the horse and immediately panicked, shouting, "Do you want me to eat it?" Then his face fell hard when they shut him down. And Lily yanked his attention and told him to wash up the moment he got the chance, because it was drenched in blood. Then, later, he stumbled to the river and asked, totally baffled, did the lie. So the lizardman tribes just toss iron weapons like they're trash this whole time? They don't even pick gear for power? They pick what looks pretty. You can't just throw away swords because you don't like the style. That's insane waste. Then he stared at his clothes and snapped that it was a disaster. He'll bounce back so hard, there won't even be a scar. He'll swear up and down that it isn't his blood. Then he'll remember the past and lock on to that weird, creeping feeling. And all through the fight, his body will start moving like it's been programmed by instinct. Maybe it all comes back to those memories of the real Gaia, so he needs to play it smarter. Because if he keeps charging enemies with that reckless abandon, one day he's going to get himself killed, and right now he just refuses to die, sure. It's supposedly God's gift, but it honestly feels like a monster's curse. And the worst part is coming up. Here's the crazy part. He could finally strike back at the Empire. He hurried to the lake, spotted someone, blurted out an apology for interrupting, and demanded to know who it was. Then he kept. He closed the distance, and there it was, Jessica, right in front of him. She spun around and clocked him instantly, then asked, "Cool as ice, did you come to wash too?" "The water's freezing, so he better not hang around." He looked completely baffled, dropped to his knees, bowed his head, and shouted, "What's wrong with me?" Then he apologized, explaining that this was how he offered it. He blurted out heartfelt apologies because he accidentally caught sight of her while she was swimming, and just as he was getting ready to leave, she calmly told him she wasn't mad at all. He was kneeling, frantically searching for something, and then she slid closer, smacked him with a towel, and yelled that she'd already said she wasn't angry. He just needed to trust himself more. He turned his head, snapped his eyes shut, told her to cover up, and confessed he didn't know where to look anymore. Then she climbed out of the lake, and he hurried to start undressing so he could wash up, only to catch her staring at him like crazy, and he told her, right there, not to. She couldn't help it. Her eyes snapped to the wound on his back, and she blurted out whether it hurt like hell. He nodded and said yes, and she demanded to know why he bowed to the Empire and even bled for it, while he wore a mildly annoyed look and snapped that it wasn't even his choice, because the whole tribe, she told him, the Empire killed the last chieftain and his wife too, meaning those weren't just strangers, those were his parents. They wiped out his whole family, yet he still stood there, ready to bow and submit to the Empire. He flashed back to everything and shouted that he finally understood it all on his own. Though, she said the elves all swore they had no choice because countless elves were dragged off into slavery, and her parents were ripped away, and rage crashed through her. She clenched her fists, bared her teeth, and swore it made her furious. She choked out an apology, turned her face away, and started wiping tears hard then, admitted the water was ice cold. So don't hang around. Keep moving. After a bit, someone leaned in and asked if they were already there, and Lily snapped that the Imperials were just painfully rude. They got the order on the spot, hit the next battlefield now. The rest of the team shrugged, saying it didn't matter where, as long as the pay kept rolling, they kept showing up, and Athos warned, straight up, that this battle wasn't the end at all. It was just the opening shot of the invasion. And right there, another one was popping off, so they got shipped in as reinforcements, no question about it. A brutal showdown was waiting just ahead an ominous fortress in the southern reaches of Argius, run by Coron. After a while, the crowd battering the fortress walls finally realized that sunset was creeping closer, and their commander snapped, "Get back!" He slammed the retreat into motion then. The moment the protagonist reached the camp, he spotted a merchant waiting there, who shouted at a soldier who was walking past and demanded to know if he wanted a quick drink he could sell alcohol at. At a discount, his curiosity snapped to attention like a trap closing. He dialed his uncle with a confused voice and blurted, "Wait, are these the barracks?" The whole air in there felt totally unlike the plains. He nodded and agreed. "Yeah, I get it," I said. "When a camp that big goes up, merchants don't usually stay away." He blinked, half surprised, and asked, "So the fight will end just as fast as in Pyros?" "Gross." Athos snapped that this time things won't slide by so easily. Not after that. Then no matter what, they'd got to meet the commander-in-chief, first report their arrival, and get in line. They pushed deeper, and the guards clocked them on the spot. "Where did you come from?" "From the Pyros plain." The plane shot through the sky like lightning, and honestly, that fight felt way easier than what we're dealing with here. MC flat out said they wanted to meet the commander-in-chief. They let everyone slip through, and right there, he spotted a whole crowd downing alcohol. He chugged the alcohol, then his gut twisted with a weird, unsettling feeling he couldn't explain. The guard marched them straight into the commander-in-chief's tent and said they were meant to show up and be there. No excuses. "Behave yourself." Then they stormed in, and he couldn't help but stare in shock. Stunned, he breathed in perfume, and then he realized he'd done it by accident. He jostled one of the girls in the crowd, and she shot him a warning. "Be careful." "Careful?" Then they stared him down and demanded, "So you're a soldier too?" They called out to His Highness, shouting that visitors had arrived. Mudoy shot them a disgusted look, like she couldn't stand what she was seeing, and shouted that nobody was allowed in. Anybody in. Because when he finally laid eyes on him, shock hit so hard it almost knocked the breath out of him. He shot it all back into his mind at once then, he said. Athos just stood there in silence, then blurted out that they were barbarians, mercenaries charging in from the plains of Pyros right on cue to back them up, and they were desperate to make a proper greeting. He bowed to His Highness the Crown Prince, took one sharp sip from his glass, then whipped it back at him, and he snapped that the barbarians were back to wreaking havoc again. Didn't they get it, that he was slammed with work? They shouldn't drag him into idle chatter. He doesn't need these freaks anywhere near him, and it's all because of Habidius. He never listens to anyone. He does whatever he wants. And those guards, they're getting punished for letting all this trash slip in. He bellowed for the servant and ordered him to haul these freaks out of here. Gaia snapped into rage, like he was about to unleash something big. Then he grabbed, seized his shoulder, barked, "Stop," and told him they'd already taken everything they came for. It was time to go, so he ditched the tent and demanded the servant show him where they could finally settle, even though he couldn't make sense of any of it. He snapped that nobody had filled him in, told them to find a free spot for themselves. And that's the whole story. No need to panic like that. The fortress siege is already winding down, and it'll be over soon. If they keep up the assault, the kingdom won't last much longer. Kingdom's soldiers won't make it. Athos snapped his gaze toward the sea as the notice too. He grabbed the ship and demanded to know where they were sending it at such a brutal hour. The servant froze in shock, spun toward the spot, and said he'd never heard a thing about it, like maybe they'd just gotten it wrong. Yeah, right. Honestly, he has zero clue about any of this, so it's probably not even serious. But the antagonist demanded an answer, saying he doesn't even know what's going on at the fortress. So why is everything there so messed up? It's a nightmare in this camp. He can't stop thinking what his uncle warned him about. He's the Empire's crown prince. So why is he acting like a total idiot? And yeah, if he's just acting, then that still doesn't make sense. He refuses to bow to him. He despises him with his whole soul, and it's all rooted in that one thing, a job. He waved him over with a fierce warrior's gaze and a mind full of thought, and shot back, asking if he'd spotted that ship. He remembered it, then admitted he thought. He spotted something that looked like one, and then he realized he was into it too. Thank goodness he caught it on the phone's map. Alphonse called out to him again, warning that the Imperial army could still lose this battle. The battle erupted, and when he heard the words, pure shock hit him, so he immediately demanded, "Why do you think that?" After a while, the stunned Imperial soldiers started shouting at the top of their lungs, loud enough to shake the whole area. They publicly declared, "The soldiers of Argias are attacking us." Two armies clashed near the camp, and a stunned Muno blurted, loudly, "What is going on here?" to a servant. Then he cut himself off with a why. Why were they getting boxed in by the enemy? Athos snapped at MC, and MC spun around because he knew they had to move now. So here's the deal. According to the plan, they still can't take him down, even after just a few days. He strode past the trading stalls, staring in awe as he said, "The food here is everywhere. My eyes are going wild. Like this whole place is a full-on holiday feast." He doesn't even clock the war raging around him. He just strolls up and says that the Imperial camp is packed with roughly 20,000 soldiers. For merchants, this is a legit holiday. Jessica's about to turn it into one you'll never forget. Jessica stared around and asked, "With shops everywhere like this, how is the war still dragging on? They better lock in on this fortress fast, right?" He said it with a smug grin, like he already knew they'd struggle. I'd say it was fine, like, if he could just get to tasty food, everything would be okay with him. And she looked a bit embarrassed as she admitted all he ever thinks about is food. Then he got dead serious and snapped that if you don't watch what you eat and drink, he won't like it here. Even today, the soldiers drag their feet during formation like they've got no fire left in them, and all they're told is to wait for orders. But nobody can explain why they were sent here in the first place. At least it wasn't some dull battlefield, just shops and streets. Gaia looked confused as he said he was there to grab supplies, not to mess around for fun. He was just a little. He bristled at that and demanded, "If you came on business, then why did you say yes and go along with it?" She looked at him like, "Wait, don't you go thinking anything weird," because she was totally thrown. The Lizardman tribe's leader, she was only trying to help him, because elves always come back to repay their debts. He got the whole picture, then leaned in and asked if she wanted to walk with him too. She snapped with fury over it, completely indignant. He paused for a beat, then shot back with a look full of pure displeasure. That everything was wrong. Rosso felt the doubt creep in, but he brushed it off and blurted out that he had. He'd already spilled that he was here on business, and they kept talking. Then Jessica jumped in like, "By the way, were these merchants all from the Empire?" He scanned the crowd and muttered that it sure looked that way, because anyone else could have been branded a traitor. He figured there were tons of different merchants here, and he just had to sweep through every shop to see what was worth grabbing. He jolted with surprise the second he spotted something. Then he called the men right away. They told him to look at it, so they rushed up to the counter, and there it was, fruit laid out in front of them. She froze in shock. He stared at the gorgeous color and blurted, "Is it a fruit?" Then the protagonist turned to her and laughed. "No, it's an orange. Peel it, then bite in." He stared in shock and blurted that nothing like this ever grows in their forest. With a warm, friendly grin, he said, "Hey, are you interested in oranges?" and then pointed to the box that had just arrived. Fresh goods came by ship from the south, and he spun around to a girl in clothes just like his, then asked if the customers could sample an orange. She nodded, but pressed. "One is enough, right?" He locked eyes on them and demanded to know are they merchants from the kingdom of Argias? He asked it with a calm face, like he'd already clocked the truth, didn't he? Said, grinning, "Your imperial language is perfect, just a tiny little." That tiny accent gives him away. He chuckled and bragged that he notices everything. His name is the next clue. His name is Karanos. And when he spoke, he said he hails from the kingdom of Argias. They do not. Split the customers into two sides, empire or kingdom, and we're the merchant trying to grab the most. The only thing that matters is the profit, so they don't have to stress he's got a license. They set out to trade across the empire, and when Rosso and Jessica finally took a bite of the orange, surprise hit them hard. It tasted so sweet, it blew their minds. He grinned and asked if it was their first time tasting an orange, then tossed in, "Or you could try water too." Watermelon, then they tried it again. And everyone was shocked in the best way because he grinned and said he was just happy they liked it. Ranges and watermelons can last forever, and they're desperate to get them to the very last barbarians. But those words snap MC's attention, and he blurted, "Why do you call them that?" And the words surprised even him. Then he snapped. "Did I say something wrong?" He was standing there with an elf and a lizard man, both of them looking like they'd never even tasted an orange or a watermelon. Then he remembered the rumors about a squad of barbarian mercenaries serving inside the Imperial Army. So he figured that's exactly who they were. He said with a tiny smile that everything was exactly Carnot, like he'd already decided it. Arneas demanded to know if they'd come for supplies, and when they said yes, he said, "Show me," because they were hauling fresh food, and he told them he was hunting for something tiny, with a long shelf life, something the whole detachment could use. With a sharp, thoughtful glare, he made it crystal clear he was definitely going to check it out. It felt like they were gearing up for a brutal, long hike fresh off the road, right after arriving at camp, and already packing up to vanish. He grinned and admitted he was the cautious type, because all they wanted was to refill their supplies. He swallowed his pride, apologized, and told her the price wasn't small, but it was still fine. The moment everything was set, he had to reach out to him, and he kept going deeper and deeper. Rosso said that merchant looked like the real deal, especially the one who always wore a bright smile. He flashed a grin, and pure confidence surged through him because that smile didn't come from luck, it came from grueling training. Gaia nodded and snapped. "I'm not some measly merchant, I'm a soldier through and through." Maybe he was a spy for the kingdom of Argeus. Then he clocked they were from a barbarian tribe, and the whole thing felt unsettling, like danger was already breathing down their necks. You'd think this would be normal, but this wasn't a military camp at all. So, yeah, tell me what you're supposed to do with that. What? Jessica blurted, stunned so. That's why the Imperial Army. The army couldn't crack the fortress. Every time they pushed in, the enemies were already waiting, fully ready to smash the assault. Attack, don't tell me you didn't get it. They already understand, right? Earlier, Athos snapped that this ship was barreling straight for the fortress of Coron. He thought it was an Imperial ship until the boy cut in and said he'd never heard of anything like it if it wasn't down. The Imperial ship didn't give them choices. There was exactly one way forward, and nothing else would work. With a worried look, he questioned his uncle. "Wait, does that mean it's a supply ship for the kingdom of Argeus?" He leaned in, thinking hard, then nodded and said the Imperial Army had a massive numbers advantage. Numbers pressed in hard, and under normal circumstances, they'd already completely wrapped the fortress in their grip. Chances are victory would have just been a matter of time, until this ship turns out to be hauling real supplies to that fortress. And suddenly, the whole. With supplies pouring in non-stop, everything flipped fast, and it gave them the strength to hold out through a brutal, never-ending siege, because food and gear kept arriving. Because the attacks were coming non-stop, the whole kingdom knew Coron Fortress was choking under a siege, and sooner or later, the enemy's reinforcements would finally crash in. With help racing toward them, the soldiers clung to the fortress and fought with everything they had, because right now, the Imperial Army couldn't take it. Then, the protagonist said, just like his uncle told him, the ship was already cutting toward the fortress. Coronos leaned in and promised them he'd secure every single resource they'd need. Resources were running out, because if that fortress hadn't been holding off the attacks this whole time, everything would have crumbled already. Just like that, the kingdom's reinforcements were already barreling in from up ahead. Joseph nodded along and shot back. "So you want us to gear up for a retreat?" He ordered a full retreat, insisting there wasn't any other choice, and he was dead sure the Imperial Army had zero clue what fate was waiting to smash into them. Rousseau leaned in and demanded, "Have you tried telling the commander-in-chief about this?" Because if the Imperials still hadn't even noticed. "Shouldn't he?" she snapped, disgust burning across her face, asking if he was seriously telling the truth. He nodded and told her not to forget who their bosses were. The MC figured, "You're not going to listen to me anyway," so he just stopped trying before it even started. He reached out, grabbed his attention, and told him it wasn't even about whether they bought his story or not. These mercenaries didn't care. They only lived for the money, and they were paid for it. Their whole mission boiled down to one brutal thing, death they couldn't dodge. So when it was over, they marched straight to the commander. Inside the commander-in-chief's tent, a servant who overheard the orders gulped and asked, could they possibly lose? And the answer hit like thunder. Impossible. Can he even picture how brutal the gap in power really is? They just keep the siege locked down and the enemy will fold on their own. He stared, clearly baffled, then said, I already told you, we're receiving supplies. And he paused, thinking hard as the words landed. Does he really think 1 or 2 ships can somehow turn this battle around? He was about to tell them about the supplies. Then another servant came sprinting in, shouting for Ponko, and told him that His Highness Muno was calling for them. Then it hit him hard before he even left. He snapped that it was all nonsense anyway, and His Highness was the commander-in-chief in this battle, and no matter what they faced, victory would still be the Empire's god. Guy blared, say these words to me, then started to storm out, staring off like he was about. They were fuming, spitting that these so-called barbarians were spouting pure nonsense because they refused to lose no matter what. Another servant bolted up to them, shouted Master, and told him their highness was furious because he still hadn't arrived. He sprinted to his tent and blurted that he had to reach it fast, because once His Highness started to boil, there'd be trouble. After a bit, Carino leaned in and said, We've got wheat and briquette cheese and dried meat 2+, dry grapes and figs, vegetable oil, salt, and pepper plus packing materials, and mountain donkeys too. Now tell me, are they really going to check that every single thing they ordered is right here? Athos nodded, thanked him, and said the payment would be delivered in imperial silver and horses. Are you kidding me? With that look of pure disgust, they're really asking, you want the horses for him? The protagonist spun toward him and shrugged, like, it is what it is. Keeping horses costs a fortune, and we can't even give them the care they deserve. The guy just chuckled, insisting, yeah, but these are good horses, and promised he'd sell them off for a fair price. Mountain donkeys could handle transportation like pros, and they were way easier to feed and care for than horses. He grinned in agreement and leaned in, asking if they'd really get the chance. Athos demanded to know if they could still count on him and his services going forward. He threw out a heartfelt apology and promised he'd be back in his home country any moment now. And yet, he sold every last thing, so the shop's shutting down for a bit. They're planning to bolt tomorrow. And he thought now that the kingdom no longer needs. He's desperate for intel because every spy is packing up and leaving this camp, and the kingdom's reinforcements are only days away. He blurted out that he was truly sorry, warned them to be careful, and then shot him a quick thank you. And MC stared on with a grim, serious face as he thought about the kingdom of Argias, This massive nation has been at war with the Empire for ages, but now it's hooked living on the Empire's money and power. So they're in no rush to unleash a full-scale offensive. Keranos turns to him with a grin and says it's been a pleasure talking with the barbarian tribes, hoping they'll cross paths again once the war's over, because the thought of it ending here would be to lose such an interesting customer. He nodded, shook the agreement into place, and said he was just as happy to meet them. Then later, they trekked back to their tent, where the whole squad had piled in, and he kicked things off by saying, right at the start, that he wanted to. He wanted to thank every leader for hearing him out and then demand they keep a tight watch on the battlefield. But unfortunately, recently, the Imperial Army brushed off his warnings. One of their men even sneered that there was nothing to fear, and then blamed them for their own stupidity. Gaia said, my part's done, and then left it up to everyone. Either trust his words or walk away. They brushed off everything he said as nonsense and flat out refused to lift a finger or make a single preparation. So he didn't care what happened to them next now. As the barbarian mercenaries leader, his job was simple: bring every last one of them home alive. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Argias commander was already breathing down the fortress's shadow, watching it from a safe distance. A soldier strode up and told His Highness, the troops are ready. They hung in the balance, waiting for his command. He nodded and said, you crushed it. And after a while, the Imperial soldiers declared it was bedtime to hit the hay. He'd drunk way too much last night, so now he had to drag himself together because they were on duty and they couldn't afford to fall apart. That waitress from yesterday was straight up stunning, so yeah, he downed drink after drink, all because of her. But did he really think throwing money around would fix things? He'd get lucky, so the soldier on watch stared into the distance and shouted it out loud. I thrust the words at them and told them, something's closing in on me. They turned and stared that way, then blurted out, who's there? So many of them, maybe they were reinforcements? No way. Nah, nobody had told him a single thing about it then they. They slammed into the shield with pounding fists, roaring out a fierce warning. He blared a warning about the attack and shouted that the kingdom's army was charging in from the north. Then the commander's voice cut off. He thundered up to them and demanded they all calm down. Then the soldier blurted, "At this rate," he warned that once they stayed trapped, enemy forces would close in from all sides. So he shouted for everyone to knock it off and stop panicking, because whoever it wasn't going to wait. Whatever it was, the kingdom stood no chance against them, because they were about to crash into them face to face. And the soldier blared the warning loud enough to shake the whole place. Ships sailing out of the kingdom of Argius cut across the sea, closing in fast toward the fortress. And the second they touched down, they'd be swarmed from all sides. So how the heck did they end up stuck in this mess in the first place? They had to rush to the crown prince right now. Athos didn't even breathe before moving. Rathos wore a grim face and said panic had erupted in the camp, and the protagonist nodded, saying it looked like Argius's reinforcements finally showed up. Arrived in the squad shot him a question. Are we really here? What do we do now? Should we run? He froze, staring ahead. He stared at the map and realized the enemy army was marching in, coming at them by both land and sea. Soon enough, they'd close in and trap them, but the imp. No matter how many soldiers the Imperial army could throw at them, numbers alone still wouldn't crush them. What were they plotting? Even with his hatred for the Empire, he couldn't stomach all those deaths, so he started backing out and told them, "Be ready, we might have to retreat any second." Then he tore off toward the commander-in-chief. He nodded and warned him to stay sharp, then kept staring at the system window, and the thought hit him. They're pushing forward way too fast, so who's calling the shots as their commander? And wait, is it Alex, the crown prince of Argius, was right there too. Right then, a soldier thundered up to the prince and shouted that the siege of the fortress was about to be lifted. He finally got what he meant, then dropped a sincere apology for keeping him waiting. A delay for the brave warriors of Corin. They need to storm in and trample these worthless Imperials. At the same time, inside the camp, one soldier, the major, burst in on the prince and boomed that their people were under attack. From the north, they're taking hit after hit, losses piling up, while fresh enemy reinforcements have just slammed into the core of fortress. His Highness has to give the order. Munoi hucked a glass of alcohol at. He pointed at them and screamed that they were brainless idiots, demanding, "Can you do anything without someone telling you what to do?" Then he cut them loose and said they'd have to handle it all by themselves. So MC finally made it to his tent, then stopped cold. Even now, with everything going on, he's still drinking alcohol? Tabel? Ponko leaned in and told His Highness what he'd heard. Then he boomed that he needed him to be quiet, because the kingdom's freaks would never beat them head on, but if they're smart, they'll charge straight at that army and crush them before they even get rolling. They should fall back into place and never dare to mess with him again. A soldier stood there, eyes full of worry, struggling to get the words out. But he jumped in right then, barged into the talk, and thundered at His Highness that with all, no offense, but he needs to call the retreat right now. Fuming with indignation, he thundered the question anyway, right to their faces, even though he was the mercenaries' leader. Why would anyone listen to him? He was right there, and when he spoke, shock hit him so hard it sounded like he couldn't believe it himself. Learning he was the barbarian leader sent chills through everyone, and Guy blared out that he was pushing forward fast like, "Don't you miss this chance. There's no retreat." Muto spun around, bellowed, and demanded, "Tell me, right? Those weaklings from the kingdom will never outmatch our soldiers, huh?" Ponko nodded, sounding totally thrown off, and said he'd heard the crown prince was nothing but a cover, so even if he's here, it won't change a single thing. He warned them the enemy army was already breathing down their necks, led by the crown prince, Alex. Soldiers froze and blurted out in shock. Wait, did he just say the crown prince was? Was he the legendary silver lion they whispered about in fear and awe? They claimed he seized a tiny eastern country in only a few days. He'd heard the kingdom's recent wins were all because of the prince. And if that guy was really here, then trouble was already marching in. Trouble he couldn't help but blink in shock, because turns out he was actually a pretty famous guy. He leaned in and warned His Highness that this man was pure danger and that they needed to back off, fast. Munoi snapped at him to shut up, warning that if they lost, their father would be crushed and disappointed in him. Ponko looked totally lost and blurted, "Wait, why not call it a temporary retreat?" To truly capture the fortress, he would. He'd just pick up the whole camp and shift it somewhere else. So the soldiers nodded and called it a deployment change. That was all there was to it. They would. He'd drag them straight into the trap, no cowardice, just pure tactics. And he was sure His Majesty would get it. Since he was the key man in their army, he knew he had to bolt first, because his life kept the empire standing, and he roared that there was no other escape. He barked for everyone to retreat, shoved the message straight to the front lines, and then, without hesitation, they turned back toward the plain of Pyro. Later, Athos shot him a grim look and snapped that this was nothing short of terrible. The protagonist admitted with a shaky laugh that, yeah, turns out he was way worse than he'd ever imagined. Retreating a whole army wasn't some small task since their sea route got shut off. They had only one desperate choice left: tear off across the land and flee. They had to take care of it, plain and simple. So they pulled back along the exact route they'd already agreed on. They were blown away when Ponko suddenly ordered them to wait, and they snapped their eyes to him. He said, flat out, "I don't buy a word of what you're saying. So just wait, none of that matters anymore." Now he had to talk to them. Maybe this was exactly how it would finally play into their hands, right as Alex was tearing into the Empire's soldiers, fighting for his life in every clash. Another soldier sprinted up and demanded, "You okay?" He spun toward him and snapped, "I'm fine," then shouted, "Attention, Airgius soldiers, listen. Their one mission is crystal clear. Save Koron Castle, no matter what it takes." They had to stand by their brothers, so they pushed their courage sky high, and together, the comrades stormed into the attack. Right as it erupted, a general nearby grabbed him and shouted that this was way too dangerous, that he needed to get out of here and just move. He should back off, and right as he did, the prince spun toward him and said, "Don't worry, you're safe." He cranked up the soldiers' spirits without pushing things too far, and the offensive kept rolling strong. Soon, they'd lock down and fortify the fortress, thanks to Carnos's intel, which turned out to be pure gold. The Imperial army was blindsided by a surprise attack, and the general hauled him in and demanded, straight to his face, whether he truly backed this war. He shot back, denied it, and fired a question. Did he really think he'd like something like this? Then he turned to Koron, that precious pocket of people they called home, soldiers and civilians, and his words trailed off as the rest of them crowded in. It's better for the kingdom, because he's nowhere near as reckless as Emperor Gordius, and that fact drives him absolutely nuts. But of course, his son didn't inherit it, on his talent and character, and the general promised them this: if they could seize the crown prince, they'd finally get their hands on the prize they'd been hunting. A huge edge in every negotiation with the Empire, and then, like thunder, a soldier galloped up shouting at them, loud enough to shake the ground. He bowed to His Highness and blurted out that the Imperial army had started moving and that they looked dead set on charging straight for the plains. Alex grinned and told him it looked like this guy was. Turns out he wasn't as stupid as they said. Now it was time to move on, because he was determined to meet Prince Mino in person. The general yelled at him from the top of his lungs, warning that it was way too dangerous. He galloped on anyway, but he clutched his head and barked that it was hopeless once his mind was made up. Nobody could talk him out of it. While everything raged, MC clashed with the kingdom's soldiers and shouted loud enough to shake the battlefield, asking how this was supposed to help them. Favor, was he out of his mind? Did he just snap and decide to wipe them all out? They came at him with magic, then they kept sprinting. And the servants who chased after him demanded, "You're really trying to slip out, so why are you stopping here?" He spun around and faced them. He snapped at them in a deep, serious voice, demanding they shut down the complaints, because if they were desperate to escape, fine. They pushed as far as they could, then immediately started griping that they couldn't go wherever they wanted. And Ponko blared out to him, asking if he really thought they could. He didn't even realize he could retreat, and the squad members started shouting right away. They just wanted to slip away with their squad. Right, so why were they tagging along with the rest of them? They even dragged the Crown Prince Gaia along, wearing a look of pure displeasure. He blurted that it was all about the gold. Then he snapped back earlier. Wait, does he really want that mercenary squad to break free with the Crown Prince? He's dead certain. Ponko figured the commander would stomp all over it, but he didn't care anymore, because he was a commander only in name, nothing more. As long as he didn't bark out any weird orders, everything stayed under control, because if his report was right, the kingdom's army already knew the crown. So that's where they'd be, right? Then every last force would slam into this place while these barbarians, they weren't even close to Imperial souls. Soldiers. If they blended in, they wouldn't draw the crowd's eye, and they could rush the Crown Prince to safety. They had one job, drag the Crown Prince back alive, because if they even dared to they ditched him. Now if they come back, they're facing prosecution and even execution. If they helped rescue His Highness, he promised them a huge reward, so big it practically glowed. Athos asked, right then, if he should have said yes back when he had the chance. The protagonist spun toward him and snapped, "Why worry about it now?" Did he really think he'd start judging him for being greedy? With a small smile, he shrugged that he figured it would all go easier. Then he apologized for giving in to the persuasion. A squad member sprinted alongside him and shouted, "Is everything on track?" And he nodded, agreeing without hesitation. He nodded, studied the map, and realized the Imperial Army's main forces were marching straight for the plains. They're going all in, slamming every force forward to shatter the encirclement, yet the Royal Army must have already seen that move coming. They hit the road with reinforcements, and they moved fast, so fast it felt like the rumors had to be true. Crown Prince Alex really is an incredible person. So far, everything's going exactly as planned. There's no way they could have missed a massive detachment moving in. For a tiny crew of barbarian mercs, slipping through is the easiest move right now. Everything hinges on one thing, getting to that forest. Barbarians have been carving through forests and climbing mountains their whole lives, and that's just how it is for them. Give it a few days, and they're hauling supplies to their meeting point. Once they hit the mountains, the Royal Army will stop chasing them, and he's praying they make it out alive after what he's about to unleash. A squad of the Royal Army rolls out, marching straight toward the next front on a mission that won't wait. Listen, if you've got any brains, you'll dodge the fight but hold up. There are everywhere, too many to ignore. He spotted something, then blurted it out loud. With a scared face, they shout that they've got to run right now. The Crown Prince of Argeus sits right on top as the head of it all, closing in on them, while the general charged forward, riding He stopped a horseman and demanded to know if there were Imperial soldiers up ahead, then asked, point blank, if they could dodge around them. He refused, flashed a grin and said, "No need for that, we're going straight ahead, head first." Both detachments slammed into each other and, "No way," blurted out, panicked and terrified as dread slammed into him. Athos snapped his name and told him, at this speed, they're about to wipe out the Crown Prince. MC is next. He blared that he'd come right to him, then snapped, "Get everyone and we're out," because they had zero chance of winning this fight. Panic hit him, and he blurted out that he better not pull any dumb move. This was way too dangerous, then insisted he didn't need anyone worrying. He'd throw them off for a second, dart back fast, and swear to himself with a grim face that he'd been the one at fault. If not for him, none of this would have happened. Munoe shot a furious look, bellowed, "What are they doing? They were supposed to protect me. Why are we in this kind of danger?" He yanked Ponko by the hem of his robe and barked, "What's going on? I told you you'd be safe." "Safe, huh? Yeah, right." Alex galloped straight through the fighting. He was locked in battle, and one burning question wouldn't let up: who the heck were these soldiers? Were they part of the Imperial Army too? Yeah, Carnos. Reynolds was calling the shots on them. Then he lunged, ready to tear into his target. They lunged at the prince, and he tumbled off his horse and let out a gut-wrenching scream of fear, but Gaia snapped into action and swatted the attack aside with a vicious swing. He swung his sword, and when it landed like that, surprise hit him like a punch, and started wondering if these were the folks from the Empire's northern tribes. He whipped around to the prince and bellowed, "Stop hesitating now!" He hesitated for one heartbeat, then bolted away while forcing himself to hold off the enemy. He slammed his guard up again, stopping yet another strike from the prince. His blade snapped with a sharp crack. Then he kept going, kept dodging and deflecting every single attack, and he couldn't stop thinking. He knew he had to buy the prince enough time to slip away. He got hit with ordinary wounds, and somehow his body just powered through, sealing them up like it was nothing, because he was built strong. So what if they beheaded him? Would he still be alive? At that exact moment, a terrifying surge of magic erupted, powerful enough to shake the air itself. An explosion ripped through the air right beside the Jessica Grashy threw herself in and interrupted their fight right in the middle, snatched his hand and blurted, "We've got to move now." Faster, she can't process it. He charged into the fight by himself. Is he insane? Or just fearless? Is he seriously brainless? There's gotta be a limit to how reckless he can get. Rosso loomed nearby, called out to her and promised, "I'll get scolded later, trust me." He grabbed Muno with one hand and declared he was taking control of the prince, then asked, "So he'll be able to escape, right?" The kingdom's soldiers thundered forward, galloping in fast, shouting for their lord. "Lord!" the general barked, shaking with urgency. "Is he okay? I told him this was dangerous, so we cover his highness and guard him with everything we've got." Jessica ripped a fire spell into the air, and the soldiers slammed their formation into place and stopped the attack dead. Then he spun around and shouted. He called the protagonist and told him the situation was dire. There was barely anything left. With barely any time left, they had to bolt. He spun toward the exit and started to. Broke into a run, staring at the prince like he was piecing together his next move. So this is who he really is, the crown prince of RGS. And she's telling it like it's the wildest secret in the world. She blared his name at the top of her lungs and demanded he hurry. Then the general said, Alex got asked if he wanted to join them, but he shut it down instantly and said that. So they demanded, leave us alone, because they had a mage, and if you kept coming after them, you'd regret it fast. They were about to pay a brutal price, so they had to lock in formation and keep marching forward. No stopping, no slowing, and the general was watching. Tell him to ask if he still wants to keep going, because he's about to learn why he should have worried about his own. He didn't just worry about his own safety. He was staring at the northern tribes of the empire, thinking, what did Carano called them? Exactly right then, a whole pack of barbarian mercenaries showed up. After a while, the MC snapped his eyes to the map, spotted wave after wave of enemy units closing in from every side. With a sharp, displeased look, he warned them, every time they went somewhere, a deadly ambush was waiting. So what was wrong with them anyway? Without that map, he'd be dead for sure. Even with a ton of them swarming around, he still managed to slip through somehow, right from the start. All of them had to get out of this forest. Everything was already disappearing, so why were? Are they still hunting for it because these meticulous bastards won't stop? It's like, it was straight up creepy, and Muno's loud shout that was it made him jump out of his skin. That's it. No matter what I do, nothing works. Why does he have to suffer through all of this? His legs went numb when they finally needed help. Why couldn't they find a carriage? Ponko warned that trying to use a carriage deep in the forest would be a brutal nightmare. He bristled at it and snapped, loud enough to cut through the air. Are you really going to be this disrespectful to me? Then he reminded him, clear as day, that it was his job to make sure he was comfortable. If they couldn't find a carriage, then they'd better scoop him up and carry him on their backs, Athos. He stared them down and demanded they take a break for a while, and Gaia nodded, already on board. And he couldn't shake the feeling that getting out of Koron Fortress was brutal. Then reinforcements from the Kingdom of R arrived. Argias obliterated the entire siege, smashing it to pieces. Then the Imperial armies got hit with a devastating, crushing loss. They crushed the enemy and yanked the Crown Prince out of that deadly encirclement. Now, all that was left was getting to safety. Athos pressed, are you sure it's worth it? And when he nodded, he pushed again. Tell me, can we do it now, while we still have the chance? Why not make some extra cash? He asked, and when he agreed, he insisted they'd get paid handsomely for rescuing the prince. Ponko stormed up to them, threw out an apology, and demanded a moment of their time to talk. He spun toward him and demanded, what's wrong? And right away he pressed him again. They looked a little lost, like they weren't sure they'd ever find some real decent food. That gentleman snapped that every single bite of their food was flat out disgusting. He was sick to death of those nasty briquettes and dried meat hell. Even that hot soup couldn't count as food, because he wanted something real. He's demanding sweets and wine plus fruit juice too, and the protagonist bristled with indignation, blurting it out loud. They weren't just sprinting, they were fleeing an enemy army, and every heartbeat pushed them to tear out of the forest and race straight for the mountains. But that smoke would instantly betray their hiding spot, and this feast wasn't some indulgence anyway. It was food for his crew, not for showy luxury. He said it with a worried edge, like, trust me, I get it all. No matter how hard he argued, it was impossible to get through to him. He wrestled with it for a second, then said, all right, yeah, I've got oranges in my bag, like they'd be the perfect peace offering to calm him down. Ponko shot a quick question, what about the soup? And he noticed his that pleased expression spread across his face as he said, I get it, and promised he'd do everything he could to calm him down. Athos questioned him, and turns out the prince is insanely picky, isn't he? He snatched up the phone, called his uncle, and with With a grim, steel-eyed stare, he vowed that in the Empire they'd demand double the payment for this pig's life. He looked baffled for a second, then nodded and agreed later. They picked up right where they left off. They pushed deeper into the mountains, blazing forward no matter what loomed ahead. One of the swads spawed the road and broke into a cheerful grin, like they were already right on top of each other. He spotted a city flying Imperial flags and snapped, "This." But this was the Imperial army. Once the Pyros were involved, they'd be safe. Later in the city, the general snapped, "First things first." He let out a breath of relief when he saw His Highness was okay. Then he heard the brutal news from Koran Fortress, pure tragedy. Yet he didn't have to panic anymore, because he was safe now. Munoy shot back with a grim look, calling it a total nightmare because they'd all been told they'd steamroll this war. Then war hit hard, and it was all wrong. The soldiers beside him stood frozen, totally clueless about what to do next. In an emergency, they just froze. What incompetent, useless idiots. And then he demanded answers. Why in the world was his army filled with nothing but weaklings? He was just about to fire back with something brutal when that guy, standing right beside him, he clicked his tongue, glaring like it disgusted him. He snapped the question. Do those barbarians even know who they're messing with? Because he was one mistake away from dying. He stared in shock, then blurted that, according to what he'd been told, they helped him escape. And he snapped. Did you not even hear me? His face twisted in pure disgust as he shouted that all they ate was nothing but slop. Those cursed savages couldn't even whip up a decent bowl of hot soup. He looked completely wiped out, so they finally headed out, and he forced a calm face even as exhaustion hit. He choked out the words and swore he'd obey his orders. Then after a while, the whole group headed down the port, and our protagonist, Dagonist, swore the Crown Prince had slipped out for the capital on the Imperial ship Rousseau, practically cheered, calling it amazing news. They'd finally be free from hearing his endless complaints. Any time now, he'd been driving him crazy, plain and simple, and that bad news stuck like a thorn. They'd have to run into him again real soon, and the anger in him wouldn't let go. And with a sly little smile, he told them they'd give it real thought once they finally reached the Imperial capital. A man hurried up, slapped on an apology, and right as he finished, he spun around and asked if he needed anything at all. He said he'd caught their eyes on the ship, then asked, "So, do you want to sail on this?" And after getting that positive answer, they finally got the green light. He flashed a grin and said, "Right on time." Then he leaned in and asked, "So, are you trying to make some money?" Money in hand, they marched straight to the ship, started hauling bags, and then he dropped the line. 3 days ago, some of the crew ditched the job, and suddenly they were short on hands, so they couldn't even sail out of the port. And honestly, you could feel how grateful he was. Athos grinned and said that if they were ready to give them a ride, then he didn't mind stepping up to help at all, because that attitude was straight up amazing. Russell said hauling luggage wasn't tough. And all Jessica nodded along like, "Yeah, no problem." And they, with bright smiles, they told her they promised a special dinner too, and she couldn't wait another second. MC glanced at them and said, like clockwork, all they could think about was food. The man jabbed a finger at the box and roared, "That's food for the rowers, grab it and haul it down." He was honestly stunned. Then he blurted, "Thanks to you guys, the ship can sail way faster." And I'd already been on a ship like that once back. Then it was a warship. So the rowers were mainly volunteers, and they got paid well for it. Paid. It looked like a merchant ship, so the rowers were all pulling like their lives depended on it. They were probably just ordinary people, and they went down. A brutal stench hit her, and then they realized every single rower was bound up tight. His eyes widened, and he blurted out, "Wait, what?" What it meant, Athos wore a grim, serious look on his face as his face screamed, "We're slaves, and I bet it was the captain, and he specially bought them just for work." A ship worker yelled at him, telling him to stop staring all around and get ready to bring the food here. He nodded with a confused stare, blurted out an apology, and then one of the slaves waved him over, asking, "So, is he also from a barbarian tribe too?" Gaia nodded along and asked, "So how do you know that?" He just smirked and said he'd got a Bruman tribe accent. Then he spotted his uncle, called out his name, and blurted, "Wait, are you him?" He froze in shock and blurted out, "Wait, does he even know you?" When Athos shut him down, the slave stared in shock, like he couldn't believe it. After all of that, you still have to ask, did he really forget? They fought the Empire side by side. And yeah, he's a barbarian too. Even on the battlefield, he remembers him crystal clear sharp as ever, impossible to mistake. So, how's Noel? Is he still alive? He caught a break and ran into his kinsman. A guard roared at him to shut up, then slammed a baton into his head. A hot blur of fury kept swinging. He slammed into him again and again, bellowing, "Who will?" Who gave him permission to open his mouth? He better shut up, and if he knows what's good for him, he'll beg for forgiveness. Forgiveness never stood a chance when the guard shouted that he was nothing but a slave. And without permission, they wouldn't even let him breathe. The antagonist yanked his arm and roared, "Stop!" He might die any second. So he shoved him back with a flick of his hand and barked, "Shut up." So they're barbarians too, huh? Great, just what we needed, total headache. They're under their control, so they can do whatever they want with them. He stared at him, pure fury burning in his eyes, and his mind snapped into place thinking, maybe he should just end it. Athos snapped his hand. He lifted his hand in front of him to block the way and shouted that he didn't even have. He had to think it through, and then the others rushed in to help him back up. He shot up and went straight to the guard. He shot his nephew an apology and admitted he'd just never been to it. So he got a little too carried away and nearly lost his cool. He shoved a handful of coins into his hands, and just like that, the guard's stance changed, thanks to the bribe. The guard finally cooled off and snapped, "Why'd you act so rude?" He threw out another apology on the spot and promised, "I'll talk to you." He labeled him a barbarian, then snapped that his nephew had really hit a nerve. "What are they going to do about it?" he snapped, then shoved over a few more coins. He burst out laughing, saying it was nothing. Anything could happen, and there's more. His ship isn't the only thing to worry about, and he absolutely wouldn't waste a resource that valuable. He snatched the MC by the hand and yanked him along before he could even think. And he stared at the slave with a sharp, worried frown. Look, and still agreed. So they hauled themselves up to the upper deck and rocked the night like it meant something. Rosso snapped, "Why are you so stupid? This is an Imperial ship. Are you really trying to kill him?" They knew trouble was coming, even if they finally understood. So he bowed, apologized for it, and then he said that, sure, he wouldn't mind beating him himself, because he genuinely doesn't really. He didn't see himself like those people at all. Then he hesitated, stewed over it, and finally called his uncle, and asked if they could somehow help him. Athos snapped his head around too. He leaned in and told him, "Don't even think about it." Then he shouted it out like it was undeniable. He couldn't shake him from his head, no matter how loudly he tried, and he's not begging for help to break out. He's demanding respect because he's the captain of this ship, and they better try to negotiate with him at least. He shouted his name and declared that this man had been crushed by the Empire's forces, because what happens to the loser is absolute. In the hands of the Empire, he's not just talking about himself, he's talking about the whole mess, because he probably didn't clock it, but there are plenty of other slaves chained up on board too. He wants to ransom every last one of them, but where's he supposed to grab that kind of money? Now it turns out they're nothing more than the Empire's hired mercenaries. He really thinks they can just pay for it? Once you get chained to the Empire as a slave, there's no escape ever. He snapped his hand onto his shoulder and told him flat out there was nothing they could do. He could just let it go. But Gaia, utterly baffled, demanded, "What's going on? How could he even pull that off?" After a while, they finally finished sailing, and in that moment he swore Galeria was the Empire's shining capital. A colossal, thriving city where every road slammed together into one roaring destination. The whole city lived under the Emperor's personal rule. Like every street belonged to him alone. In the throne room, the general demanded permission to step forward and congratulate His Majesty. After crushing the kingdom of Argias's army on the plains of Pyros, they surged through the chaos and seized several. Key points flew in, and the port of Pyros landed on everyone's radar too. The Elm, thanks to sheer luck and grit, the Crown Prince finally made it back to the capital safe and sound. Glory to Emperor Gordius standing there with a calm, unshaken face. He said they'd done great, and the crowd gasped, because no one ever expected to hear about them all the way in the imperial capital. Anyway, these rude savages are about to get out of here later in the office. The man called the head of the barbarian mercenaries, along with his deputy, and told them they'd just delivered an absolutely unforgettable contribution to the battle. Herman Marteferto is taking charge. He's the one who's going to hand out the rewards to the mercenaries. It was a weird mix of "nice to meet you," and the protagonist just stood there confused, tried to play along, and then got royally messed up. And to their shock, he was surprisingly polite to them. He snatched the scroll and said he could shine the spotlight on it. Show off the two biggest wins their mercenary crew pulled off, helping hammer victory on the Pyros Plains, then rolling in as reinforcements at the Koran Fortress, and even backing the Crown Prince as he fought his way back to the capital during the retreat. He figured Ponko was the Crown Prince's personal servant, straight up. That's what he believed. Honestly, he didn't trust him one bit yet. Somehow, he still kept his promise. And that's honestly impressive. Thank goodness it's finally over. He asked if they had any wishes, and when Athos stared back, deep in thought, he admitted he couldn't even begin to imagine what to expect. He said His Majesty was insanely grateful for their help in bringing the Crown Prince back to the capital, and that he'd offer them anything they wanted, as long as he could make it happen. He mulled it over, then asked straight up if he could get a permanent tax exemption for all barbarians. So, is that even possible? MC wrestled with it, and realized barbarians must be some of the poorest souls on earth. If Uncle had demanded a huge pile of money or other supplies, it would have truly eased things. But it was just a stopgap plan, and while that worked, the Empire used tax collection to squeeze out more than cash. It gathered intel on every territory it ruled. If barbarians get a tax break, the Empire's surveillance crumbles way more than anything else in his playbook, and that's why it matters so much. Sure, he's only a little worried about how he'll react. Herman waited for a second and nodded, saying he got exactly what they wanted. But taxes were the Empire's backbone, and he couldn't. You can't just keep one whole people tax-free forever, it won't last. He's even ready to swap to a new term look at the barbarian territory's tax money right now. How about 5 years? Athos was stunned, and he said that he compared the Crown Prince's life to just 5 years, and that was insulting. No, it had to be at least 30. He mulled it over and snapped that they were seriously downplaying how vital their territories were to them. Sure, they can't grow crops, but they keep the hunting stocked and the timber coming, and every receipt gets logged in the right documents. So he demanded they rethink the exemption period, even though those papers definitely won't spell out the forced labor the barbarians were forced to endure. Their tribe's numbers have crashed hard, so they can't cough up taxes like before. While Agaya stares at the news, with his mouth almost hanging open, he silently wishes his uncle luck and wonders how in the world he stays so perfectly calm. He figured dealing with an Imperial would be way tougher than anything he'd faced before. Maybe he just couldn't stop plowing into people like that, over and over. As his uncle warned, this trip wouldn't be easy, and it sure wouldn't be quick to reach a deal, sure, but he was clearly playing a much deeper game. He flicked his eyes to the nearby system window and immediately sized it up as the kind of mid-level desk job for a civil servant. Based on what we know, this guy didn't just get by. He was genuinely skilled and dangerous in the best way. How can a guy this talented still be stuck as some ordinary employee? Herman said, "All right, then we stop at 15 years, and during that stretch, every barbarian the lands would get a total tax exemption, and soon after, he'd draft an official treaty and slam it into their hands. If trouble pops up, you'll have to meet again and tell them to stay out of the capital for now," and the protagonist agreed, with a bright, easy smile. She thanked him, then realized, oh wow, his uncle had pulled it off, somehow, in just 15. 15 years is a long, breathing eternity, plenty of time to pull his plan off, and now he's ready to finish restoring the barbarian. Baryon hits the ground and instantly powers up, muscling through the Empire's pressure. He blurted out that he was genuinely grateful for the generous offer, and he said it with a friendly grin, like, "Hey, this is exactly what your crew earned," and he meant it. A worker showed up, called him master, and blurted, "Can I talk to you?" Herman spun toward him and demanded, "What's going on? If it wasn't urgent, they'd talk later." He said, voice tight with worry, that they'd received a demand for payment because the bill from the cat house had been sent, and it hit hard. Prince Muno stayed put, and they demanded payment right away. Then Athos said, "Go on, you can leave." He couldn't hold him back a moment longer, so he hurriedly apologized, then asked how His Highness, the Crown Prince, was feeling. The employee, shaking with worry, blurted out, "You don't need to know." And then the Crown Highness stepped in. The Crown Prince drowns himself in booze and endless pleasures, and every time a civil servant hands him the monthly expense reports, pure dread hits him like a truck. Just the other day, they got hit with a ransom demand for the prisoners who fought in the Battle of Koran Fortress. That's a jaw-dropping amount, Are they really expecting the last prince to care about this? He burst into laughter and admitted he was having a rough time. Then the employee snapped back and said, His Majesty the Emperor is the same. He loves a good drink, too, and in recent days, He's been hitting the bottle hard lately, and honestly, it scares him how bad his complexion looks. Even His Majesty struggles enough just because of his body. Herman spun around and told him that he told them to watch their words, spun toward them, shot out an apology, and then said that he must have exhausted them with those dull stories, but Athos insisted it was still a pleasure talking to him, and after that he thanked them for their kindness, promising he'd reach out again later. Later, the two of them stepped outside, and MC declared it felt like they'd just crossed paths with a truly good man. You, nai, and bas, and you can you mayo. Reed said he'd also been brutally strong in negotiations. Truth is, after 15 years, he was already thinking about pulling back for the next 10. Then what happened next? But somehow, everything blew past his expectations, way bigger than he thought. He blurted, Wait, what's going on? How can someone this gifted end up stuck in a low position? He nodded and said, I don't have every detail, but I've heard that some high-ranking officials in the Empire. It was basically a who's who of famous aristocratic families, and it felt like they cared more about rank than about what someone could actually do. You could see it plain as day in the prince's entourage. Talent and skill alone won't cut it when you're trying to climb to the top, and Herman apparently figured that out the hard way. Gaia blinked in shock. Wait, did he really just agree? He shook his head hard and demanded, how could you possibly lose someone this useful? He thought, so nepotism rules even here. Of course these problems exist. Still, he couldn't deny the talent either, but the empire grew insanely strong, so strong that it had so many talented fighters and mountains of wealth, and then you realize his opponent is so insanely strong that people on the street are hawking all sorts of. A bunch of those items kept insisting they should come at it one by one, so today they're about to. There's flatbread stacked up and chicken soup simmering on the menu. Hey, hostess, 3 servings for us, please. He burst into the place where Rosso was sitting. Someone who'd ordered 2 more servings spotted him and told him, they're here, go on, eat, we already ordered. Ordered a plate for him. Then he dove in and lit up, grinning that it was insanely tasty. Amazing. Jessica tried it too, lit up and went, it's delicious. But come on, how is this just ordinary soup? What's the big deal about it? And there it is. The protagonist just stands there with a calm face, like nothing in the world can rattle him. He figured it was all about the spices. Salt and pepper were rare where they lived, so in the Empire, almost everyone's got them. Rosso reached out to her and blurted that he was truly grateful. Relief washed over her as she handed them their medicine. Then he stared at him and shot the question, are we running out? Looks like he's out of medicine, and his tribe's paying the price in a big way. So tell me, how are they holding up right now? He reassured them, saying, don't worry, those wounds bounce back fast. You just take the medicine and crash in bed. So after all that, they've gotten used to charging in and taking massive risks in every fight. A fierce battle raged on, and she snapped that they were down to almost nothing, with the ingredients barely left. During that escape, they burned through their supplies like wildfire, so she tagged along with her uncle to the market. And guess what? Do you know what grows everywhere? They're hauling it in here because it sells for a fortune, and yet somehow they barely spent a thing. She'd seen those exact plants growing in the forest near the capital. Tomorrow she'll go collect them, and he totally froze. Then blurted that they should tag along, help her, and make sure everything gets done. She blinked in surprise and shot back, asking if the lizard men can even tell medicinal plants apart. Then he just smiled and admitted he wasn't sure. In the future, she should just take the lead, because she flat out warned them that beginners shouldn't mess with this, not when there are poisonous plants everywhere, just waiting to bite if you touch them. He finally understood her, and he promised, at least then we'll go hunting. And out on the plains, he spotted sheep everywhere. She glanced sideways, called his name, and demanded to know why he was like this, wondering if he'd been domestic. He was grinning, and MC admitted he was just relieved they could finally click, yeah, the way this was headed, it was only going to get better. Rosso shot him a shocked look and blurted, so what did you do today? And he started showing how he and Athos charged toward the castle. Then he yanked out a pouch and said they swept through the aristocrats' houses and snagged He slapped the money onto the table, each bill hitting like a fret, like he was about to tear the whole room apart, but the rest cuts off there. He totally caught them off guard, and then he beamed and asked, joy spilling out of his voice, "Look how cool is that?" They scored a big lucrative deal with the Empire as a reward for saving the prince, but every other aristocrat in his crew, they never got a single reward, so they kept pacing their houses, and he flashed a grin anyway. Then it all came flooding back like they were staring at them with eyes that screamed pure, unmistakable disgust. Of course they were barbarians, and the Empire's people spit on them, and every time he pictured it, rage burned hot inside him. They stared at it, then admitted the sum was huge, and honestly nobody could stand the crown prince, not even for this. It was honestly worth the payoff, so he leaned in and demanded, "Is this really enough for you?" And he made it clear he wasn't about to back down. He hadn't even had half the aristocrats' houses. He'd helped them flee to so, when they realized it, they were stunned, and they straight up asked, they're roaring way louder than that, this is nowhere near even half of it. And with this money, they'll grab everything they need and more. They need to stop and figure out exactly how to use it best. He nodded with a sharp, tense stare and snapped that it was a brilliant idea. After a while, the squad finally regrouped, and Athos leaned in and declared the Bruman tribe. Enro, Bondar, the elves, and the lizardmen were all there. So the leaders' meeting could finally kick off, and today, he and Gaia went door to door with the aristocrats, collecting, snatched the rewards from their hands, then tore into the costs for lodging and supplies before he pocketed what was left. A massive, jaw-dropping amount still sat there untouched, and everyone erupted with joy, practically shouting about it. He said it was seriously awesome, like they busted their butts for it, and it shows. He said, according to the rules, we've got to split all the gold evenly between the tribes. Then he smirked and spilled an idea on how to use it. They stared at the cash in shock, then blurted out, "Wait, what are you even talking about? So you're telling me they don't want to hoard every last coin for themselves? He's not going to hand them his reward. They'd better shut it and stop spilling nonsense. This gold is his, and it's about to be claimed." Jessica told him to calm down, but he couldn't stop his mind from spiraling about what the leaders of every barbarian tribe is slammed into this place, and each one is grinding for the good of their own people, and he'll chase those personal dreams. So if he wants them to finally agree, he has to make them believe that every cent will go to for the common good. He locked in a serious stare and said he'd cut the nonsense and get straight to the point. This gold will be used to ransom the barbarian slaves, and when the news hit them, surprise exploded across their faces. He stared in shock and blurted, "Impossible, slavery can't just be erased. So what do you even mean? Even if they get ransomed, maybe the slave finally tastes freedom. But what happens if nobody sells them at all?" Elenif shot his hand up and blurted, "I've got a question first. Is it really, Pa? How in the world would you even ransom slaves?" The protagonist said, "Don't sweat it, only people from my tribe belong here," then added, "You can always ransom slaves." And the whole point was to reach a deal with the slave traders, because the slaves he was talking about were barbarians too. And then it hit. This wasn't just talk. It wasn't just his tribe they cared about. Any slave they captured would be ransomed, no matter what tribe they belonged to. He'd weigh every leader's opinion too, and each one sat there thinking in silence. And his nerves kicked in hard, because why were they all silent? Was something wrong? Or did they not want to risk bringing their fellow tribe back into the mix? Tribesmen fell back. So why? Just like that, Athos spun toward him, and he made it crystal clear he was against it. He blared his voice at him and demanded to know why he was saying that. He leaned in, spoke his name, and declared, "I'm your nephew. Your opinion matters to me, and I respect it." Gold could genuinely buy freedom for countless people from slavery, yet he's convinced it's smarter to put that money to work rebuilding instead. To forge the tribe, he couldn't risk it. Buying back slaves would scream trouble to the Empire. So he barked, Doesn't freeing those barbarians from slavery help restore the—" And he shouted even louder, telling the tribe he needed to rethink it. Think again. If they really drag people back to their tribes, what happens next? MC blared the question like it was breaking news. He doesn't even blink, because to him it's normal. They're buying slaves like it's just a routine deal, and they won't stop. He's ready to tear up every imperial law, he yells it so loud, don't you get it yet? And this plan won't stop at grabbing just one or two slaves. The Empire's officials aren't dumb. There will be zero trouble with the purchase itself. it'll cause problems. They couldn't risk that one wrong move would instantly spark suspicion, so the rest of the squad waited up and agreed that they'd better not expose themselves, because if the Empire strikes again, they're finished for good. So yeah, use that cash to beef up their tribes, because even after they split the gold, that pile still won't be small. Their tribe is supposed to live in peace for an entire year, but luck deserts them, because fate says they won't be able to do a damn thing. Helpi still had no clue what was going on. Athos clapped a hand on his shoulder and told him they should spend. They're gonna blow this money on themselves, mouth-watering food, pricey fabrics, and everyone's gonna grin like they just won the lottery. Gaia shoved his hand aside, shouting that it was horrible, because thinking about their families mattered most, and there was no point dwelling on slaves anymore. Yeah, he'd witnessed the slaves' torment with his own eyes, so there's no way he can just look away and walk off. Are they really ready to toss these people aside just because they're scared of the Empire? Chief Mabu yanked him in and barked, "Stop shouting already." He's got to be ready, because the time to stop saving these slaves is already here, and that money's never coming back. He figured it was safer to treat them like they were already dead. Rage lit up his face as he snapped that it was way too much. Even after becoming slaves, they still fought like barbarians, he said. Snapped in a furious voice that people don't become slaves until they lose. Lose the war? He's done with helpless idiots women are mixed in among the slaves, and then he snaps, telling him to drop this plan right now. So don't you go poking the Emperor for no reason. Does he even realize what trouble that can spark? You need to get this. You refused, and you did it with a face so serious it felt like a warning. Russian said he won't listen to a cowardly, hardly a dog. He snatched his chance to ditch his comrades. Then he got. Rage surged through him. He kicked the guy and shouted, "Sin." If he's not thinking straight, then he'll have to spell everything out to him. The moment felt different. Then the protagonist shot up to his feet, snapped up from that hit, then cursed him out loud like it was personal. Chief Abu grabbed him by the throat, yanked him down hard, and slammed him to the ground then. And suddenly everyone else leaned in, grinning like this was the best thing they'd ever seen. He suddenly started pounding his face with brutal punches, loud as a riot. He leaned in and shouted that he called her a coward, right to his face. He's nothing but a naive kid, so he shouldn't start believing that being chosen. As the leader of the mercenaries, he can call the shots, but one wrong move, and he'll regret every word. He jerked his arms up, shot to his feet, then slammed his forehead straight into his nose. Right after he stood up, it shoots through him immediately. He hurled him over his shoulder and slammed him onto the ground with a loud impact. Said he was pathetic, and he's convinced they're cursed with bad luck, and it feels like fate shuts every door in their face. They've all watched it happen, seen exactly how they're being treated. They've been dragged through pure hell this whole time. I swear, they've got no choice. Chief Mabu. Lewis put in the work, then snapped and said it was all pointless. Just staring at the Empire boom? The power gap slaps you in the face, and it's downright foolish to even try to defeat them. An enemy no one can beat. Yet here they are, mercenaries the Empire just hired. What's the point if he just brings the slaves back? The MC shot back. Pissed off his father, Chief Noel, had risen up and rebelled against the Empire. Do they really think he was some clueless fool who couldn't tell the difference in power? Instead of staying on his knees, he stood up, clenched his resolve, and fought for freedom. He got crushed, and the barbarian horde got dragged into slavery and fear latched onto their hearts so hard they completely forgot. With barbarian pride roaring in his chest, he'd keep doing what his father started, and he didn't care one bit what the Empire thought. They had no choice but to rip their enslaved comrades out of captivity, and he was already geared up to go all the way to the end. Even if it meant sacrificing his own life, he'd do it, because once they'd chosen to stay loyal to the Empire, it was better they turned around and went home. They were furious about it, spitting, "So he's calling us loyal dogs of the Empire, is that it?" Every one of those slaves was one of their own, and they swore they'd drag them all back. He nodded and declared, loud and unshakable, that their spirit would never be broken. They've got to shatter their fear and chase what their hearts are screaming. They'd race in, rescue their fellow tribesmen, and haul them back home. Everyone backed his choice so hard it shocked a bunch of people later. Later, Jessica wiped the blood off his face and snapped. Said he was still bleeding, and he needed to stop moving. Those wounds had to be treated right now. Gaia yanked back from him and snapped that she was fine, he was fine, so stop wasting medicine on him, and he even convinced himself the wound had truly healed. She attacked the handkerchief with even more force, scrubbing like she was trying to erase every last thought. With a disgusted look on his face, he demanded she stop saying it hurt. She told him she and his uncle had hauled in a mountain of medicinal herbs, so he could stop stressing, kick back, and stay put. He nodded with a tiny smile, then immediately thanked her. She called him up and demanded to know how long he'd been stuck in his head thinking about. He talked about ransoming slaves, then slammed down the truth. He just couldn't. Back in camp, he didn't say it out loud for sure, but the thought hit him hard. Maybe he hadn't been anything special. Maybe he had just grown up normally. Grew up in a world where slavery was supposed to be impossible. But honestly, trying to explain it feels like trying to catch smoke. He said he couldn't stand watching his comrades get treated with that kind of cruel brutality. Cruelly, she blinked, looked totally lost, and said he was just so strange. At first glance, he looks almost too simple-like. She'd call him naive to the bone, yet somehow he even riled Chief Mabu enough to fight for his idea. He spun around with a baffled expression and snapped that he didn't mean to. He just somehow ended up angering him. Jessica said it takes a ton of courage to do that. With a bright grin, she said he looked insanely cool, and then promised she and Rasa would back him up, so they better give it everything they've got. These words hit the protagonist like a spark, urging him to keep moving, and he nodded along with her, grinning like he just won the whole moment. That evening, Chief Mabu stayed in the same spot and leaned in to say, "Law." Athos barked out in a painfully displeased tone, and the worst part? This guy kept him fuming while Athos just smiled. He snapped that it was nothing, just his nephew, and yeah, wasn't he adorable? Still, indignation burned through him. He blurted out, loud and clear, asking what he saw as cute. In that kid, he'd admit this guy had skills, sure, but he never saw him the way this child did. Didn't he shut down that plan right from the start? So why in the world did his mind flip so fast? He grinned and admitted he'd tried to talk him out of it, because how could he ever defy the wishes of his dear nephew? Before his death, he vowed to his brother standing tall like a fearless warrior, a brave, responsible leader who was ready to throw his life on the line to protect his comrades, no matter the cost. He remembered the call how he told his brother, straight up, that he had to run. He had to run, he was their leader, and if he fell, who was going to protect them next? Newell grinned and promised, "Take care of the tribe, my son is all yours." He should just trust him, Chief Mabu's displeasure rising fast. His disgusted face practically screamed that this was completely ridiculous. No matter who it was, you couldn't bring yourself to get attached to that word. Athos said the words of a dead man haunted him because, yeah, he'd thought the same thing at first too. Only after he got crushed in that battle did everything snap. He changed, becoming more. He slowed down and finally started thinking clearly then. His mind kept drifting to one burning question. What truly happens to the poor barbarians? Trying to make life better for his whole tribe, he saw. There was one young man he trusted with his whole life, and somehow he just knew he'd finally pull off what neither he nor his brother ever could. With a grim, unblinking stare, he pressed the question. Does he really think he can take down the Empire? He nodded with a grim face, agreeing without hesitation. He yanked up his mug and slammed it onto the table, then screamed, "You idiot!" loud enough to shake the room. He told them, when the barbarians are staring at annihilation, don't regret what you just said. Just don't down so much liquor. Who's stuck cleaning up this disaster room? He just nodded along with a calm, smug look, and he promised that soon he'd finally start believing in himself.